Okay. So this is our third and we hope and last session on this book here, Basic Questions of Philosophy by Heidegger, on essence of truth, and in this part, Wonder in the Greeks. It's subtitle Selection Problems of Logic. We left logic about 5 exits back. And we're just on to the history of the essence of truth, something like that. And for this part, we're reading sections 4 and 5 of the main part. And that should wrap up the book. So for those who are new, the format is kind of do a round robin of people talking about, did they manage to do the reading? Are they familiar with this material from before? And their first impressions, first reactions. And first impressions should also include anything you want to make sure that we talk about when we get to the longer form discussion. When we're done with the round robin, I'll go through parts of the text, things I want to highlight in some detail, and answer questions along the way about any of the passages that were confusing or need some more exposition, etc. At the end, people just jump in with questions all along the way on that, and comments all the way on that. At the end, have a little bit of wrap up, and especially because we're ending the book, overall impressions of the book. What case are you trying to make? Did you make it? That sort of thing. We also want to discuss a little bit at the beginning when we might want to meet next and what we might want to do. There've been a couple of rather ambitious suggestions of things we do, like mindfulness, which I don't think we're quite ready for in terms of my prep, if nobody else. So I do have a suggestion for what to do next time. Hi, Isabel. I do have a suggestion about what we could do for next time, and a proposed time. There are some holidays and activities coming up in April. So the two times I could suggest are either the 13th or the 27th of April. Can't do the 20th for family things. So 4 or 6 weeks from now. The text I suggest going back to doing is just questions concerning technology from this. It's come up multiple times. I think we might have done it once before we even went online, but certainly haven't done it with most of the people here. And it's from the Basic Writings book. There are definitely some sections late in this, in our own reading, that get to this, and it's also come up several times in discussion, especially attitudes towards something like the modern sense of truth and reactions to Nietzsche and all that kind of stuff, which is, to me, all wrapped up in that essay. So it's only about 30 pages. It's in Basic Writings. You can also find it in some other collections. There are some Harper Row collections, I believe, that have it along with like 4 essays. But it is in Basic Writings. If you get this edition, that's the translation I'm going to use. I'm sorry. It's page 311 to like 341 in this text. So yeah, that's my suggestion for next time. And when we do the round robin, tell me if 13th or 27th works better for any of you. I am also, this is definitely gonna be a 1 session kind of thing. So it doesn't preclude any of the other more ambitious suggestions people are making. If you have other suggestions or things to do after this, by all means, also air them either in your first response or in the at the end, if you prefer, for things you might want us to take on in the future. Doesn't have to be Heidegger, that seems to be the theme. Lastly, for new people, you may or may not know, we record these sessions and put them up on YouTube later. The channel is just called my name, Jason Cawley. If you look for that in Heidegger, you can usually find it in YouTube. And we've got like 3 years of material going back in the whole discussion. Once I learned to hit the record button on Zoom. All right, so for our round robin, Pete, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I read the final third of the book. Uh, no big surprises. It's kind of I think one of the best explanations of what he means by the essence of truth as aletheia. Uh, I was a bit surprised by the like 12-part section on Thalmasian awesomeness. I'm not quite sure why he went through that. since it's about the first beginning and not the other beginning. But I guess he's saving the other beginning for contributions that we read and the dispositions of the other beginning. Uh, I noticed the this use of the word disposition, which we had the same translator, or the one of the translators overlapped with contributions. So they use basic disposition for Grundstimmung. Uh, I found that a little difficult. I like some other people use fundamental attunement, which I think works better, especially when Heidegger has a sentence that has Grundstimmung and Befindlichkeit, which kind of also translates as disposition. Uh, so I just think it's useful to see whenever you see either of those to think Grundstimmung, the fundamental attunement of people. And it's interesting how he's moved from, in being in time. Grundstimmung is something personal that Dasein has, whereas now I think we're in 37. He's gone through the Grundstimmung of the people when he was doing his Holderlin lectures a few years earlier. And now it's like a historical basic disposition rather than the personal one that it was in being in time. So I found that interesting. I'm okay with either of the dates. And another suggestion, yeah, I agree that mindfulness or the event, the post-contribution private writings are probably a bit much. Uh, but we haven't done Parmenides, which has come up a couple times, and that has some Plato stuff, some Homer stuff that's unique to that series of lectures. So that might be a possibility after question concerning technology. And regarding the different volumes people might have, on my website, I have a one-page question concerning technology that also includes the pagination for the basic writings and the green book, the
Yep.
question concerning technology, other essays. So that might be helpful to people if they have different books to situate
Yep.
what we're doing while we're reading it.
That's helpful. Yep. No, I like the Parmenides is a fair suggestion. It's not that challenging a book. There are definitely some things in it where I wished he could have gone further in some of the getting into the Parmenides on philosophy stuff. But it's not a crazy suggestion. Some of the issues about what does and doesn't happen in the Greeks, we're definitely going to talk about in the latter part of this one. And that's not a crazy one to go to. Obviously, we've already done early Greek thinking, the other place that comes up. Okay, so either time is fine for you, 13th or 27th. All right. Thanks. Claire, do you want to jump into the deep end now?
Yeah, so I kind of found this late, and then ordered the book. I got to page 110. So I think I'll have to finish reading and apply what everyone says after the fact. But just from what I've been studying before, maybe if anyone's willing to rehash what you've talked about before, I was kind of curious or had questions about the term representation, kind of like earlier on, like on the earlier pages of
Mhm.
what specifically it like, because I guess I kind of been reading or interested in like general semantics, and if that's like what it if it's what I'm thinking about I'm just confused about the term representation. So if anybody could talk about that.
Sure.
But I am also available for either of those days as well. But yeah, I think since this is my first time around, I'll mostly listen, but I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, which I think is not really good at all, like very basic understanding of everything. So I'm mostly here to listen. But
That
yeah,
sounds fine.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, and we'll definitely try to talk at least a little bit about representation, especially when it comes up. If you got to page 110, you're 2 pages away from where it gets good. I'm just joking. He does get on like page 112, 113. I've got a bookmark because it's where he gets into what
Oh,
being means for the Greeks, but it's not particularly about representation, but it's one of my first, places I want to go to. 2 pages on. Just one other resource. Pete mentioned his Heidegger page. You should definitely check that out. It's a website on all things Heidegger.
yeah,
And the other resource is just all the past lectures we've done, discussions we've done together on YouTube. Both resources to look for if
great.
you want more background. Cool. And next time maybe you'll, since it's only 30 pages, have a chance to have read it all of it with us.
Yes.
Okay, great. Isabel, you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I did the reading and I loved it. Very, very clear. Some areas very foggy, but I know they will be explained here. I thought that it would have been better, Jason, to have perhaps read this before we read contributions, because there's some aspects that were much more explained rather than total mystery with contributions. He seemed kind of mystical and airy and ethereal. But here you can see how rigidly he grounds his arguments on Greek earlier philosophy and even the historical facts and everything. I will be asking about one aspect, which I'm just zooming in on. There are many. Lived experience, as Claire was saying, there's that particular one. Lived experience is difficult for me to understand since I have no background in philosophy. And but as I was mentioning in day one, that I am a polyglot. So as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Lived experience is an experience that is, as he says, lived, and he is so adverse to it, so adverse to this experience. I think it's because it cuts the present. It's totally in the past, so that even if we go into our tenses in verbs, we have, for instance, I went. That would be similar to a lived experience. But I have been, notice how the present is kind of sucked in or carried. They play against each other. The same thing in Italian. Sono andata. I have gone. Sono andata. And it's called passato prossimo. It's near past. Whereas the other one is passato remoto, was andai. I went, andai. And the same for French, except they said composé. So, but I'm not 100% sure about that anyway. About the dates, I didn't quite hear them. So, but I'll catch on.
13th or 27th of April. So basically the Sunday before, the Sunday after Easter is the question.
Okay, I guess they both are okay with me. Also, the book will be the question
concerning technology.
Technology. Yes,
that's a 30-page essay. Yeah.
Yes, it's. I think I already have that somewhere.
Yeah.
I Xeroxed it.
It's there's a collection. Yes, that's the Green Harper Row collection that has them all, and it's also in basic writings.
Right. Yep. Okay, well, that's it for me. There are many things to discuss. Oh, one thing I thought as I was reading, I said, why did you divide these chapters? I think they're each chapter has an enormous amount of material. How come, for me anyway, I thought it was difficult to kind of to read and retain what had been said. So, but I
Okay.
did read, and I was so sorry that I didn't read the supplement. I just started reading. Beautiful, beautiful, and the appendix.
And the
Beautiful.
appendices has a bunch of his like first draft versions of for himself, and some of that's useful. In terms of why we do, you know, two chapters at a time, it's just to get through it in 3 sessions instead of 6. There's, you know, and I think it's an amount that we can manage, at least if our discussions go 3 or 4 hours. On lived experience, the first thing to understand is that there were a lot of people who reacted to being in time as thinking that it was about a philosophy of lived experience. They were trying to put what Heidegger was doing together with a lot of the thought coming from people like Dilthey and others in the late 19th century and other existentialists of the time. And Heidegger is violently reacting against that tendency, but that tendency is, from his point of view, trying to trivialize what he's trying to do in existential philosophy, something like that. If I come to this way, an ideal type cartoon version of the kind of thought he's worried about is people who will divide scientific truth claims on the one hand and purely subjective psychological lived experience on the other, and claim that the two of these together are all of human life, but there's truth over here and there's feeling and emotion over here, and they try to keep them more or less separate. They think that lived experience is, you know, incredibly valuable and everything, but it's incredibly valuable without any truth content. And all the stuff about truth and science is kind of detached from it. So it's an almost an object subjective split. And lived experience is his term for the people who treat the sort of emotional, affective color of life, as well as anything which is would remind them of subjective experience as a consumption good, as something which is, you know, within the subset of the category entertainment. It's viewing the subjective side of life as something one feels and undergoes because it is joyful or entertaining in some way, but it's entirely separated from anything like truth. And that's that kind of tendency to divide philosophy into scientific philosophy and subjectivism, with the subjectivism all being focused on an almost non-rational sense of subjective feeling, is the tendency he's reacting against. And the claim he makes various claims about it here, but at bottom, he thinks that winds up trivializing the things which are put into the category of lived experience and putting them in boxes decided for them by the rest of the culture around them, if that helps.
Yes, it does help, but there is something else to that, and that is really terrible, and it really reflects on our time, is that lived experience becomes done, and then we discard it. And you know what, Jason? We want another one. And you know what?
Yeah.
We want another one. It's
Yeah.
a never-ending hunger.
Sure. I mean, the other thing you get in the modern versions of this is the fact that people treat their lived experiences as things which are performative for others that they share, rather than even things that they actually authentically experience themselves. But again, these are all the things which will get us into the reasons why he has a Pianist Bonner about lived experience. There were lots of people who were praising his early philosophy as doing justice to the depth of lived experience. So this is the kind of praise that makes him, that incenses him, put it that way. Okay, praise in quotes. Dan.
Yeah, with related to this is like he also is closest to life, and I think it's kind of what we these days we call mass culture and stuff like that, that it's already prepackaged and served to us as stuff that should we enjoy, and everyone is enjoying these things together, and they are already programmed and packed and ready to enjoy, and his philosophy is not that. And you are right, the existentialists took it that way and he hated that, and they said, yeah. Anyway, back to the topic. So both dates are okay with me, and actually, I was wanted to reread the mindfulness, but now that we have it on schedule, I will wait a little bit longer. And I think that's a great book, especially after contributions. But we'll see. But technology is also something.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
sorry.
may have to do a few other things before then, but I do hope to get to it at some point when I'm prepared.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I thought that was it's not as deep as contribution, but it's more like more systematic, and in a way it's easy after contribution, but we'll see. It's technology is fine with me also. I wanted to return to that for some years. And
Okay.
The book, let's see, I read the last 2 chapters. I think what struck me first was how similar, like I think you pick it because it's kind of, it reflects in a course format the contribution, and I was surprised that he put that out. I didn't know that. Even if I read this way back, I didn't realize how similar is with contribution, and probably he put it there, and probably people didn't react very well, were confused, and then I think he decided not to go that far and keep everything private. I don't know, but I'm surprised how similar and how much of is with contributions, and he's going to that the second beginning, and he's not going into event and so on, but all that stuff. The second thing I think is this issue of essence of truth, and why is this thing is kind of, to him, is the pivotal point. It's what he can make all this change and transition, and to him this is the point, the essence of truth. And it's kind of, here is go back to against correctness and the entire modernity and representation that you mentioned that, and then he's going back to Aletheia, and it seems like this is the point where he's trying to change everything around this essence of truth. It seems like this is the core, and it goes deep into philosophy. It's something that he can point out to other people in the community or in the philosophical community. And I guess, we read that essay that you suggested a few months ago, and I think this explains why that it's so important for him. He goes back over and over to this issue of essence of truth, and to me the core of this is that point where he's discussing the transition from, or the interaction, Aletheia, Physis, and then Techne. That's something I hope we'll stop there and we go a little bit into that.
Definitely try to get that.
Section.
I mean, one of the things which is curious here is, on the one hand, the focus back on Aletheia is meant to be another beginning. On the other hand, it's meant to be an interpretation of what was accomplished in the first beginning, or a reattaining of the ground or a depth that was already there. And we have to pay some attention to the tension between those two views of it. He obviously has a way that he's going to explain or resolve that, so to speak. But does he claim to have rediscovered something that was seen in the Greeks, or does he claim that he has discovered something that was left unthought in the Greeks? And the answer is, of course, both, because it's Heidegger. We have to see in what senses for each of them. Okay, fine questions. We'll definitely want to get to some of the later things, both on the wonder, or that Pete was talking about, and then the Aletheia into Techne turn, if I can put it that way, with Physis and Techne. There's multiple distinctions that need to be gone through there. Not all of them are in what he talks about, but so we have to see what the inclusions and omissions are in his own treatment of it. Josh, first reactions. Oh, and dates.
Yeah, as far as the dates, either date is fine. And I think that I like the question of technology. It's an interesting essay, so I think that's a good pick. Yeah, there are lots of times when I miss being in time, because he shoves in there so much that's vitally important to him. And I think it's just inevitable in a writer's, the arc of a writer's career, that they begin to then, kind of, not necessarily that they repeat themselves. Heidegger doesn't simply repeat himself. He's always, I mean, you could, hold on just a second. There's a bit of a train here. I mean, so on the one hand, Heidegger, of course, during the 30s is venturing into this new territory for him, but still, it's a little bit, the substance is a little bit thinner. That is to say, I find myself going through more pages in order to get little kernels of what I want. And I did get, a lot of valuable stuff here. But one of the most frustrating things for me is that Heidegger, for me, he's not able to provide the evidence that I'm looking for in order to resolve a question or a kind of a point that's in conflict among, Heideggerians, and that is the distinction between, beings and this more primordial origin, that's that of wonder. One way that one again can be led to understand the distinction is in terms of, okay, the sort of creative generating process, is what wonder is all about. It prevents us from simply ossifying and reifying, principles and concepts and and the like. But it doesn't prevent us from being able, nevertheless, to have this sort of to have both. That is to say, we lay down or find ourselves or find disclosed to us a world, and then within that world we can lay out logical structures and the like, happily do that, and Heidegger is perfectly fine with that. The other way of looking at it is that even when we think in terms of these logical structures and these causal relations and all these things that the sciences have sort of made use of, that even there's something that is being there's a dynamic, how do I put that? There's a mobility there. There's a movement there.
So you're saying, so you're talking, if I can help clarify for a second for everybody else, I mean, you're talking about how, wonder is sort of about getting stuck at this level of, before you're at the level of the beings are emerging in a background chaos. There's an uncertainty of a way in or a way out of the appearing of beings in the first place, that has a kind of chaotic fluidity or mobility to it. And wonder is a sense of being stuck, and not getting past that initial unsure what is happening, against which the background of the beings appearing will appear, right? So, and you're saying that it's unclear how much the fluidity of that background chaos, so to speak, that wonder is stuck on the level of, persists into the experience of the more structured world after beings and causal relations have been thrown over them as a causal net or something, or as a conceptual net to try to order and make sense of them. Is that fair?
Yeah.
What you're saying?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So another way of putting it is to say you can think in terms of sort of an alternation between schemes and their dislocation. We can work within those schemes, and then we can lay our, as you say, our logic and and our specifically empirical structures on top of those schemes, and then at some point those schemes are going to be laid waste to. That's the wonder. It's like, wow, we're deposited in a whole new way of understanding, and so you have that, and that's the pattern of history, just this sort of endless sort of alternation between one and the other. The other way of looking at it is even thinking in terms of the notion of schemes. Is missing something. Is that the schemes themselves are even within their own domain, within their own use, there's a fluidity and a mobility, and a transformation within them. They're built upon that. Within their own essence, they are of that, even before you get to their dislocation. And so that those two ways of looking at it, I don't think I wait, and as I go through the pages, I'm like, come on, give me some evidence here, give me something substantive, and he's never able quite to do that. I just get little bits and pieces that I kind of collect together and say, well, maybe I can use this as evidence in favor of one position or another. But yeah.
I mean, in the previous essay we read back in December, this was the background of the mystery, right? Is the underlying thought here, that the insistent structures of systematic reasoning that try to completely order the world always take place as a focus on the highlighted and comprehended on the background of the mystery of the uncomprehended is always the larger environing space, and that uncomprehended has the form of, because unconstrained, a free transcendental, right? That's what you get in the essay we read in December. The place where that's echoed here is this notion that of trying to understand not all of motivations of Greek philosophy, but this specific wonder stage, so to speak, as arrested in uncertainty at that level by the mystery. So it's trying to experience the mystery directly, and something like that. We'll have to get at what he thinks of as the Greek mission to understand the beings afterwards, and interpretation he puts on that. I think, by the way, this is one of the reasons he goes into such detail. Someone asked, why does he go to 13 levels of detail on what the experience of wonder is? Because it's important to him for understanding the first beginning, and also for understanding basic dispositions or fundamental attunements, as Pete has it, from an instance, so to speak. But the underlying picture is certainly the background of mystery on which the truths of the beings appear. He does, however, insist these are truths of the being, and he lived and insist on this in the technology essay we get to. It may be a challenging revealing, maybe all kinds of things that are problematic about it, but in framing is a mode of revealing. The things that are revealing are true. Anyway, that I agree these are important questions to put these things together, and they're especially brought out in this essay just on the stuff on the experience of wonder specifically. Some of that may also relate to the move from Physis to Techne. Get to that in a bit as well. But one of the reasons I want to go to questions concerning technology after this is to exactly link up to those sorts of questions, if that makes sense. Okay, Leon, first impressions.
Good evening, everybody. I managed to do the reading. There were several themes that kind of stuck out to me. The first one I thought was a very simple and lucid explanation of being as presence and constancy and form. A lot less technical than some of the other explanations that I've read. So that was kind of useful to me. The second, probably to me, the most salient theme was where he starts discussing absence, and absence not as a negative. And then he moves on to distress at not being able to find a way in and a way out, leading through into the between region, where being and non-being are still undetermined. I thought that was very good, very clear explanation. And alongside that, I found the suffering as the creative tolerance for the unconditioned. That sentence really stuck with me. And those were the key themes, really. I would like to ask a question similar to, is it Dan, about where he brings Techne into the discussion as well. That would be useful for me, for some more understanding there. And to do with the date, any date is fine with me. And I would like to look at Parmenides, but question concerning technology would be good too. So I don't mind either.
Okay, that's all second vote for doing Parmenides after technology.
Okay.
Yeah,
that sounds good.
That's all I'll take. I agree with you. The discussion of the sense of being for the Greeks, this is like page 112, 113 or so, is very good. He does a short recapitulation of it later, but the first explanation of it, I think, is, how to put it? There's lots of things that you get in Heidegger that are, you can ground them in the text. This is not one of those. This is something where he's doing this act of synthetic interpretation, if you get me, of, I can jump into seeing things from an older thinker's point of view and see what he must be thinking of, so that this stuff gels and makes sense. And the proof of such interpretational leap, so to speak, is always in the how much they explain, right? It's not in the, can I draw this from a piece of text in Parmenides or in some Heraclitus fragment. but is instead, if you look at what they're trying to mean by being with this lens on, how much does it make clear why, Parmenides will be talking about the forceful, and Heraclitus will be talking about the common, and the hen panta, and right. There's a whole bunch of things that wind up getting that gel and make sense with that that lens on. We still want to look at if that's the only trend going on in the Greeks. I note that there's a bit of tension between that understanding of being and the remaining at the undetermined wonder level of being and non-being still appearing the same, something like that. Those two levels need to be distinguished, and the quest for being discussed in the what being means gloss that you described as clear needs to be put together, is not quite the right word. It needs to be laid alongside the discussion of the uncertainty of wonder to see what is being highlighted, brought out, or made problematic in that tendency. What is all this getting at? It's all getting at perception versus something like interpretive understanding as the origin of beings. Beings have to have this character of the stable, the form, the not indefinite, but they are arising, appearing out of a background of an indefinite. And that means that there's something being sought in the mere perception of the indefinite that is not just perception. It is not satisfied with indefinite. If you like, that's in the end the way out, so to speak, that the Greeks find for wonder. He doesn't link it up quite that way in this section, but I think it's fair to make that connection. Not every appearance has the character that meets what they describe as being in the page 112 description of not unlimited, formed, presence, unchanging, right? And the desire to, not just desire, the focus on that as what counts as being is a arising selection out of a background that is more variegated than that, so to speak, to begin with. So that structure, I think, is meant to be Heidegger's gloss on what's the unconcealment, and also what's the arising, the physis, arising, appearing aspect of this basic experience of being in the Greeks. It's not just the uncertain background flux. And I can bring this out, even though we don't have all the early Greek thinking here, by a contrast between the sort of Anaximander level and the later pre-Socratics or Socratics level when we get to the interpretation part. But those are definitely, it's good to bring out those as things to focus on. You said either time works, yes? Unless I get other things, I think we're steering towards the 13th, because if I have a choice between 13th and 27th, I'm going to pick the nearer one. Nathan.
Hey guys, I have read the book, but I didn't do the preparation for this call, so I'm excited to listen.
Okay, that's fine. Feel free to have your questions either in the discussion section or at the wrap-up section. Is it Tausif? Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
So I could not manage to do the readings, so I will be listening, making notes, and probably after the call post some questions on the YouTube channel.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, so if we've gotten through our round of introductions, I'm going to burn in that there were no votes that it had to be the 27th. So we're going to say the next time is going to be Sunday, the 13th of April. And the reading is going to be just questions concerning technology, about 30 pages. I will use the translation for basic writings, but you can definitely, if you want to check on pagiation things, check out Pete's site, Being with a Y, to look at cross pagiations and so forth. Okay, what do I want to cover here? Quick outline. First, I want to cover, there's some sections in 4 which are a little bit repetitive. They're a lot focused on the history and the why are we doing this sort of aspect of things. They haven't gotten deep into the interpretation of the Greeks. They're very focused on the, think of it this way, the temporal aspect of what he is doing, the positioning this as reaching back to a first beginning, trying to reach the level of historical as opposed to historiographical. And if I can put it this way, you get ambition, humility, whiplash. Meaning on one page, he'll say, we're going to completely overturn this egregious error in the Greeks of what they left unthought. And the other, next page, it's we can barely humbly hope to approach the level that was once achieved by the Greeks, and thus make the slightest possible preparations towards a purely possible other beginning, right? So you get this extreme of claim and this snap back to humility, and he does that like 3 or 4 times, right? The rhetorical register goes from insanely ambitious to insanely humble, seemingly every other page, and it's easy to get whiplash from that. And we need to understand a little bit about why that's going on, how complicated the relation is that he's claiming here between what he is trying to do and what he sees as being the thought in the Greeks. This is related to the claim that at the end of the third section, he basically established, at least to my satisfaction, to the reader's satisfaction, he's hoping, that the Greeks already had an understanding of this level of truth, or level of necessity of truth, or essence of truth, that is deeper than the level of correctness, that is the background required openness upon which correctness rests. And the way he has presented this is that they have to be right about the correctness thing for this to be a grounding of that correctness thing, and therefore to be, an actual ground. In other words, they kind of have to be right about this in order for not the correctness part, but even the openness part to be soundly laid, so to speak. But by early in 4, it sounds like if they missed something about the openness, it would unsettle everything they did about correctness, instead of the other way around. And then we'll get the claim that they did miss something about the openness. They saw the openness, but they never directly interrogated the openness. And that will be, a major change that sent philosophy on the career that is the West, or something like that. And all of these closings off of the possible access to Aletheia. And then on the next page, it wasn't a mistake for them to close that off, because it was just the fact that they were staying true to their own destiny, which was to create the foundations for the origination of thinking in the understanding of the question of what are the beings. Okay. I first just want to get people's reactions to these somersaults. Do they make anyone dizzy, or are you always just assuming that he is that the humble asides are not really meant and only the ambitious ones are? Thoughts or reactions on this?
I, for one, did not notice that.
Okay.
It must be el cariño te ciega, as the Spanish say. Fondness blinds you. But I did not notice this whiplash. I followed step by step by step. I see now that you explained that it must have been there, but I, for one, did not accentuate it.
So did the Greeks miss the fundamental question of the interrogation of Aletheia itself, and thus close off, all these possibilities, or was that just them staying on mission? Josh.
Well, he does say that we're all Western philosophy, since the Greeks, has been in the shadow of the Greeks, that in a sense that we're almost as if we're treading water by, it's not as if there hasn't been any change, but those changes are not of the order of this absolutely, dramatic sort of beginning that the Greeks instituted. So in that sense, he seems to, relative to, the contributions of philosophy since the Greeks, he's able to elevate what the Greeks did. And then I suppose, he would say, well, you honor your predecessors most by going beyond them. And this, and he also argues that you're always in a continual conversation with your past. It's in the nature of understanding history, as opposed to historiography, or understanding history historically rather than through a
Historiographically, yeah.
that you never leave the past behind you. So there's always going to be this room for a kind of a reverence and a respect, but I suppose that alongside it would have to be this in order really to be up to the level of those, of that past, that you owe it, it's almost a responsibility, to then make attempt a move which is as dramatic. I suppose he does see himself as making that move, which is just as dramatic as the Greeks, you think? That he's certainly not, doesn't seem to be putting himself within that category of the entire history of the West that was sort of just kind of treading water, within the shadow of the greatness of the Greeks.
Yeah, I mean, he'll also tell us along the way that the greatness of the West is over. It died with Nietzsche and Holderlin, who may open up another beginning, but it's at an end. Died isn't quite the word he uses. He just says at an end, and he says that could linger for a while, but inessentially, so to speak. So there is it's not simply a humility thing going on here, is the point I'm trying to get at. When he's discussing the Greeks staying on their mission to found thinking by understanding what are the beings, the question of the first beginning and in contributions, he'll say, if they had just said on Aletheia, it would all be over. There would be no need to do the rest of Greek philosophy, right? This would have closed everything off. It's better that they stayed at the periphery and didn't just say on Aletheia, because if they just said on Aletheia, it would have been over, and there would have been any need for the other elaborations of Socratic philosophy and Aristotle and all that sort of stuff, which seems like a gross overstatement. But sorry, Pete, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'm kind of like Isabel. I didn't have a strong reaction to the back and forth, possibly because I've read Heidegger so much that I'm kind of used to these jumps. But what strikes me here and in other texts I've read recently is that these were lectures to students, and I always wonder what the students made of it coming at it fresh. Without, I assume they would have read Being in Time because it was a bestseller and so forth in their milieu. But so much of it, especially this Greek stuff, depends on having read Heidegger, where he's explained basically what the Greeks understood and didn't understand. I'm always struck by what did the people sitting in the lecture room
Make of this?
make
Yeah,
of
sure.
this.
Sure. And I think that there are some of the bouts of humility, if you can put it this way, that are definitely meant for the students, right? He doesn't want the students to get too big for the britches, so to speak. So a little bit of humility every now and then about the greats that you're wrestling with is, important in any philosophy program, so to speak. The history rather than historiographical context, I think from his own point of view, if I'm being bold about this, he wants this to be about the future decisions, right? It's historical if we're wrestling with these things because there's something actually at stake for us that a future decision will turn upon. And he doesn't want that to get bogged down into minutia of, did this person anticipate this thought in this way, or did this person make that particular error? And the other questions much debated by scholars. I will claim a little bit later that historiography has its rights and we have to pay attention to some of that stuff. But I understand that some of his focus on this is because he's trying to get people to see these as living issues that could matter for themselves and the decisions they're making now, and not as something, completed past, as I often put it, right? So all that I get. There's still a radical dichotomy in what he claims the Greeks did and did not accomplish. He even remarks at one point, if if they left us an unanswered question, isn't that great? Because it means that we get to try to answer it, right? If they left a question for us, that's wonderful. But that's too superficial for them. I'm sorry, there's other people's hands up. Dan.
Going back to this contradiction, and like Pete, I'm used to it already, and I don't see a problem. But to me, it goes back, like Heidegger always said that the time of the system is over. Like we still try to arrange things in neat and logical and non-contradictory structure, and it's over. Like he goes back to this kind of history, and whatever is necessary there, it's even if it's contradictory, if it's necessary to him, that's legit. And
yeah,
we
he also, however,
like,
at one point, sorry. I'm going to just interrupt for a second. He at one point almost accuses himself of inventing a private philosophy of history, a private and idiosyncratic philosophy of history. And he tries to say, no, that's not really what I'm doing here. But it's a little bit what he's doing here. sorry, keep going, Dan.
And also it's not dialectic, we have like this kind of like, you put a contradiction in a sentence, you do something, and you kind of put them, like appease them, and you make them turn out.
Yes, it's not head spinning in the way that Hegel is in terms of contradictory things on each place. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Sorry, Isabel.
Yes, I just wanted to answer Pete's question. I've been I'm a self-taught Heideggerian and no philosophical background. However, I have listened for about 10, 15 years, many Heidegger videos in 4 languages. Mm-hmm. And so I have a perspective on that. I understand that Heidegger was extremely popular. And not only that, but to show how the students much appreciated his lectures. As he was walking in, they would stomp their feet. I can't stomp here, but stomp, which meant that they were waiting for him because they had never heard philosophy taught, Aristotle, Heraclitus. They had never heard Nietzsche taught in that way. Mm-hmm. So to answer the question, he was extremely popular.
Yes, I think we can take that as given, but it still means we don't know quite how they were interpreting him. They could be popular they were reading him one way, or popular because they're reading him another. But yes,
he is, if I may just interject, he is a good teacher, having taught many years ago, because he is doing his course with the point of view of the student, and that is so extremely important. When you try to impart some knowledge, you have to do it from the point of view of to whom that knowledge is going to, and he's doing that. So he is a good teacher. He must have answered questions. They must have had questions. He must have answered them.
Yeah, I mean, what we have here, transcripts are often taken from what he planned to deliver in the lecture, or sometimes from notes of students in other cases. So some of the, if I put it this way, the byplay that would happen in the classroom isn't preserved in how we get these texts. But fair point. Okay, does anyone else want to comment on the ambition whiplash, or what the Greeks didn't see? I'm going to go farther on what the Greeks didn't see in just a second, but I want to still get to the historical framing part first. Anything further on the historical framing? Okay, Holderlin and Nietzsche. He brings in Holderlin and Nietzsche to say, these are the things which will tell us that this is a live historical question, not a historiographical question. Why? What does he say about Holderlin and Nietzsche here? Why are they coming in, and what is the question that they make that is made salient by those 2 names that would be relevant to this question of the essence of truth and what the Greeks did and didn't do with it? Obviously, he had some courses a couple years before this on Holderlin. He's doing all the Nietzsche lectures, right? So we understand those other things being out there that people would have some awareness of, and they were certainly, as he even comments in passing, in vogue now, right? They've become fashionable, as he puts it on 110.
Well, Holderlin it introduces suffering, passion, suffering. And also Holderlin introduces the ray of a new or another beginning, and the depth of the the darkness in which people are now, and the hope. Maybe the hope is not the right way, but the new beginning. And Nietzsche, well, I'll let someone else talk about Nietzsche.
So on the Holderlin point, I think some of those are fair, but I mean, Holderlin certainly didn't invent the historical and philosophical importance of suffering, right? He's inheriting that as a theme. Heidegger tells you directly the reason why he thinks Holderlin is important, and he said the same thing in Contributions. There's only one issue that makes Holderlin important for him, and that is it's the bottom of 110, right? There's only one thing that makes it important. It is a decision over the final flight or new advent of the gods, a decision which, like everyone, includes a predecision over our preparedness or unpreparedness with regard to such decisions. That's the reason Holderlin matters. No other reason. In that context, why does Nietzsche matter as the end of philosophy? We'll say later about Nietzsche that we have to survive him as opposed to evade him. This is on, I think, 116. Is that the right place? It might not be. But he says that of Holderlin, it's about this decision about the final flight or future advent of the gods, and of Nietzsche that we must survive him, and that in him Western philosophy as it has been comes to an end. Those are the reasons he's bringing them up. Do either of those make sense to everybody here? You don't see anything oracular or mysterious in these declarations?
I know that Heidegger sees Nietzsche as Nietzsche's philosophy as ontotheology, so the eternal recurrence of the same. He sees that. I know sometimes he talks about Hegel as the culmination of the metaphysical tradition, but then sometimes it's Nietzsche as the end of the metaphysical tradition. So I'm just wondering if it's to do with Nietzsche as an ontotheologist and overcoming that into the new beginning.
It's definitely thinking of Nietzsche as the last stage of metaphysics. It's definitely thinking of him as fitting into the structure of metaphysics that he laid out in the Nietzsche lectures alongside Hegel. Hegel is subjectivity was still having an attachment to truth, and Nietzsche is something like consummate subjectivity in the Nietzsche lectures on this subject. But surely in the decision about the final flight or new advent of the gods, Nietzsche is not exactly on the same side of that question as Holderlin is, right? He's definitely on the final flight side of it, right? Calling something historical is something you do, according to Heidegger, if you're treating this as a live future possibility that is uncertain and that remains to be decided. He's saying that final flight or new advent of gods is such a historical decision currently facing the West, not simply philosophy, but the West. He associated in Contributions the new beginning with the possible appearing of the last god, right? Nietzsche is instead only of the last man. We'll get to some of those other relations of that to end of philosophy and technology in the question concerning technology. But Nietzsche is something to survive, to arrive at the decision, this decision point. This decision point is only a decision point if we are open for the possibility that is one of the things which is as yet undetermined. For Nietzsche, this is determined. It's closed off. And if you want to know why, you can read Zarathustra. He can't make a god, so there aren't any. You need to pay attention to these things where he throws in this as the background history here to know what Heidegger thinks is at stake when you're moving to the level at which the question of the essence of truth resides, right? Which may be something like the place where Josh's fundamental dissolving of paradigms occur. There is a fundamental paradigm going back to the Greeks that Heidegger is expecting it is possible to dissolve, and Holderlin has already explained that as flight of the gods. Okay,
Yeah,
It's-
so
Go ahead.
just a comment in historical terms. In the 30s, it's the first time Nietzsche has appeared in the syllabus, and Holderlin is also kind of new. His collected works were being published. And the edict had come from Berlin that the syllabus would now be around Nietzsche and the will to power and the Übermensch for obvious reasons. And Heidegger is making a stand that this is a complete misinterpretation of Nietzsche. What the students are getting as undergraduates, the selections that are mandated from Berlin.
All true.
So there's that. And
on the Holderlin side, though, he says that Holderlin has been neglected for a century, even though he was essential and is more futurial than Nietzsche, he says here. I agree with you that he, especially in the Nietzsche lectures as a whole, he is taking on the way in which that interpretation is being pushed by the regime very clearly. And he is also situating Nietzsche squarely within the tradition of metaphysics as he describes it, as its end, but in it, not outside of it, not its overturning. I still think that the futureness of Holderlin as opening the possibilities of return of the gods, to put it poetically, is meant by Heidegger here seriously. It's not a political adaptation or something going on only in the 30s. It's meant seriously. Josh?
Yeah, this is kind of related to what the point Pete was making in terms of Heidegger's environment. I think personally, I think he was finding himself more and more isolated. He had put out Being in Time. It was already a number of years earlier, and he was hoping and expecting that it would be received and understood. And I think, there's indications in his writings, in the Black Notebooks, that he was very disappointed in the fact that that people didn't get it. Doesn't matter, how well it was received. They were not, they were misinterpreting as an existential tome, as an,
even as neo-Kantian, yeah.
Yeah. So in that context, I think, and then Pete was pointing out that that now Nietzsche is being misinterpreted, and so Heidegger's looking around him and says, okay, I got to grasp onto whatever figures I can surround myself with that are where I don't feel so isolated, and that people have an access to what I'm getting at here, even though they didn't go far enough, and particularly Nietzsche didn't go far enough. He ended up being the last metaphysician. Nonetheless, Nietzsche, Heidegger now is he's trying to find new ways of being able to recognize and accept and then re-strategize around a scene that he's recognizing is not prepared to understand him, and he's asking himself, why are they not prepared? What is it that is needed in order to prepare them? And I think making use of Nietzsche, bringing Nietzsche up, and Holderlin up here, is a way for him to be able to say, here's kind of stepping stones. Here's sort of a kind of a bridge.
I get what you're saying, but I mean, it's not clear to me that Holderlin is that much of a bridge for him here. But because it's especially for the more philosophical academic philosophy people of his day, it's quite a stretch. But yes, there's the issue of isolation. Yes, there's the issue of trying to appeal to other writers that are popular. He could have easily picked other writers than that. He's picking writers that in whom he sees something essential to be taught on this issue of something like the ending of the West, as it has been, the ending of the first beginning. There is he talks about it here as the depth of their re-engagement with the Greeks that let them appreciate it at that level that is necessary to, if I can put it this way, move any of the stones laid as deep as the Greeks laid them, something like that. What Nietzsche and Holderlin have in common there is the depth of their understanding of the first beginning. Sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, he's not just mentioning Holderlin, he's also incorporating Holderlin in his language at this point in his writing. He went from thinking that he needed neologisms and a new kind of newfangled language in order to get people to understand him, to learning from Holderlin that just the language of the people, but a poetic language of the people is what's necessary. And that, so Holderlin becomes part of his, his change in the style of his writing.
I agree with you that their influence on the style and the more, if you could put it this way, the poetic thinking of later Heidegger. But here he's very clear on the decisive thing. The reason that he is appropriating Holderlin is not because he's so appreciated and not because of his aesthetic qualities. It is because there's a decision about one question, and we have to take that seriously. Okay, so I would put it as the new beginning is meant to reach down to a level of founding about the essence of truth that was there in the Greeks, and you have to understand that that means a potentially civilizationally revolutionary change is possible on that basis at that depth. And to me, the stuff about talking about the possibility of the final flight or new advent to the gods is trying to denote that depth, right? Things which the 19th century, certainly in early 20th century in Germany and elsewhere, would regard as settled questions among the enlightened, so to speak, he does not regard as settled. So yeah, you have to recognize that those things are part of what is in play in going back to the level. Okay, we get the claim that the most essential occurrence in the Greeks was a non-happening, that they didn't investigate aletheia for itself as such. But we got at the end of 3 that they did see the level of aletheia as the necessary open that allows truth as correctness to be founded. Truth as correctness is founded upon the openness of beings. The openness of beings is seen in the word aletheia. He'll give us a little bit later that it's seen in the word physis. It tells us what resonates in the word physis, but he'll give us most of the things which are true about being, not about the word physis itself in that respect. But all of this culminates in the unhappening, the non-event of there is no direct engagement of the Greeks with the question of aletheia itself. Instead, the question is always, what are the beings? Okay, we're familiar from the contributions, for those who are here for it, with the distinction between what are the beings versus how does being with the Y essentially occur, right? As the question of the new beginning. He's not mentioning that aspect of it here. He's instead treating it as a question of, although they're related, but he's instead treating it as a question of what are the beings versus aletheia as unveiledness interrogated for itself in its own right. Is what he is saying here, what he is claiming here about what the Greeks did and didn't do, didn't accomplish, and maybe why, clear to everybody. It's a somewhat nuanced claim about what they did and didn't do as opposed to see. Because he is claiming they see all of the things about the openness, the foundation of essence of truth that he is claiming are true. He's not claiming that they didn't see that. He's claiming they did see that. They found it was part of their basic experience of meaning of being, and even the basis of, we'll get to the wonder in a little bit, but it's basic to them, and yet they did not explicitly interrogate it. Does anyone have any thoughts on that claim? What is his evidence for that claim?
Well, he's for that they were aware of the openness. He's founded in Heraclitus.
Absolutely. On the awareness of the openness, you can find it all over. And where's the proof that they didn't interrogate Aletheia as such?
Well, because they went in.
Because they didn't write contributions.
Because they didn't question the clearing. And
is it because they didn't use the word?
And then they went off in the other direction.
Hang on.
Into.
I got to slow down, right? Is it because they didn't use the word clearing or didn't write the contributions? Where they didn't formulate the concept of Dasein? What's missing?
What didn't they get? You mean
The claim is they never directly interrogated aletheia. Okay. Now, I've read a lot of Greeks. Some of the Greeks I've read reference other Greeks that we don't have. There's a lot of things they inquired into. It's not obvious to me that it is proven that the Greeks never interrogated aletheia directly. What is the evidence?
I don't know.
Does anybody else see? I mean, it's an argument from absence, but the absence is being measured against the standard of something like what we today, we Heideggerians, Heidegger himself, see as the essential question to be asked about aletheia. In the Parmenides lecture, he'll talk about what they were thinking about aletheia and the plane of Lethe. In the early Greek thinking book, there'll be all kinds of things about how Anaximander saw the open and Heraclitus saw the open. In the Plato Essence of Truth book on the section on the cave, he will explain how there is a understanding of being on a prior background of open, and there's a light metaphysics of the good. He will claim this is getting too metaphysical, that it's reified, but it is an attempt to understand the surrounding background light in which something like beings can appear, right? Metaxy as the between is even a technical term in Plato. Okay, all of those are arguments from presence, even presence in the Heideggerian corpus, but they don't count. Those don't count as interrogating aletheia directly. I'll give you another argument from absence. There was a man named Protagoras. He wrote a book called On Truth, Aletheia, right there in the title. We know its first line. Of all things, man is the measure of things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not. It's the opening line of Protagoras' On Truth. He's the subject of 3 different Platonic dialogues, right? He's thought of as a classic of Greek relativism. He's the person that Socrates is arguing against in the first part of the Theaetetus, who is famous for claiming that knowledge is perception. If we're moving away from the immediate perception to something else that's more like correctness, he's on the perception side of it. So you've got a man who wrote a book on truth, saying that truth was all about perception, who issues in a Greek version of relativism, whose fundamental best known statement is that man is the measure of all things. Did he not interrogate truth or the open?
Well, it's the things, because they focused on the things.
Yes, but the measure of what is not as well. Protagoras has 2 other things 2 or 3 other things he's famous for. He's famous as an agnostic in theology who claimed that we don't have the powers and our life is not long enough to know about such things. Same person who is the Man the Measure fellow. He also is famous for all of his work in codifying rhetoric and heuristic reasoning, contentious reasoning. And in that way, he seems to be over on the pushing everything into discourse side of things that you would find later in Aristotle. So I don't doubt that Heidegger would dislike the way Protagoras addressed the question on truth. I do not doubt that he would find man is measure of all things an inadequate explanation of Dasein. But is it because they didn't look at the question or because they didn't come to his answers? Right? I think they did look at the question. They didn't look at it his way. I think that Protagoras in particular has lots of things. He's kind of a Richard Rorty avant the letter, right? And the Socratics were all about taking him down, right? They didn't want to go that way. And when they appeal to other standards of truth, and they want to say, man is not the measure, God is the measure, is what they want to conclude in Theaetetus, they got all kinds of reasons for doing that. There's all kinds of reasons that are shifting away, but it's because the open gets entangled with the idea of truth as perception, not noetic perception, but aesthetic perception, sense perception. And equating truth with sense perception lands in a relativism that all the big philosophers of Greece are against. Only the sophists are in its favor. Okay, the terrain is more complicated and they never looked at it, is what I'm trying to say, right? They didn't look at it Heidegger's way, but it wasn't because it wasn't a live issue for them. The way it was a live issue for them is different than the way he's presenting it. It's not just never looked at it. Okay. So this is why I was saying earlier, historiography gets its rights, right? You have to cover this. Similarly, when he talks about all the ways in which the Greeks experience being, I think it's great interpretation. I agree with it. I think it makes sense of tons of especially later Greek philosophy. It is not true of all Greek philosophy. And this is an underlying continual criticism of mine, right? Heidegger is here playing the historical game of a philosophy of history that is about what happened in the Greeks. The Greeks are a monolith. They're one thing. They do one thing. They can be played off as one stage in a progression, as one thing. The Greeks are a microcosm. There's all kinds of Greeks. There's all kinds of things inside the Greeks. And that complexity is covered over for the sake of these essential distinctions. Maybe you need those essential distinctions drawn that way as simplifications for students or as levers through history, for that matter. But it's not simply true that the Greeks were as monolithic as this. So when he talks about the essence of being, one of the critical things he says is that it is constancy, form, and limit. Of the Socratics, this is absolutely true. Of Aristotle, of Plato, this is absolutely true. Is it true of Anaximander? Anaximander says that the origin, source of all is the unlimited, the apeiron, right? He will give you exactly this picture of the arising and disappearing of the entities in the sea of time, right? In the fragment, right? For Anaximander, what actually is an eternal process of time in the unlimited, not the beings that arise. The beings that arise are precisely the things which pass away. So in his thing of constancy, they don't have enough constancy. What has constancy is the process. What has constancy is time. What has constancy is the unlimited. The presences and the forms are ephemeral to Anaximander. So you can't get all of the Greeks on the same side of this. He's got the late Greeks pinned, that he has them correct. That's what they think. But it's not all the Greeks. All the Greeks are not Anaximander and Protagoras and Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Thoughts on any of that?
So you're saying that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle settled on constant presence as the ontological basis, foundation of their thinking.
I think it's Plato who specifically puts it at something like form or limit, and form not just in the outer form version, but conceptual form. But he does so precisely because he's seeking something constant. And it's because there's this connotation of being as the thing sought here, which has to have the accent or note to the Greeks of strong, reliable, bedrock, foundation, necessary. Everything that is too changey, too ephemeral, too merely apparent, too illusory, too mortal is not quite being to at least these later Greeks. Being should have the accent of the immortal, should have the accents of the gods, should have the accents of the divine, should have the accents of nature, not art, arising, appearing of itself, not made by man, of underlying truth, not mere opinion, of underlying, not appearance, not image. All of those accents are all in the direction of finding something stable, finding something reliable, not necessarily stable in the sense of never changing, but something you can rely upon. And the notion that how the beings emerge from the background of the flux of uncertainty is as what is stable, reliable, divine, as opposed to ephemeral, mortal, passing, unstable sand. I think that that is critical to how being gets interpreted in the Greeks.
Right. So you're saying, so the post-Pythagorean philosophers wanted something as stable as geometry, but why didn't the other Greeks question the clearing then?
So Anaximander thinks that the only stable thing is time and the ongoing flux of the change in the unlimited. He denies that anything else is stable, right? Parmenides thinks the only thing stable is the necessity with which being is. Everything else is opinion. Protagoras thinks that if we can put it this way, the phenomenal process of perception is the only way in which truth is conveyed to people, but it's from the standpoint of the other philosophers, opinion, image, sand, right? But Protagoras thinks that's what we actually have. Human beings are limited to opinion and sand, to Protagoras. So the point is they're disagreeing about these things because they're disagreeing about what actually is and isn't stable, how the world actually does, or the machinery of it actually does work. And that variety, yes, they're disputing around questions, and his interpretation of what they want being to mean is spot on, but they're not a monolith. And some of them are considering the aperon, the unformed, as opposed to the formed. Some of them are considering change, the background instability or chaos, because they're looking for something stable, and it seems to be the only thing that is, right? So anyway, that's just my own read on what's going on here. I mean, I don't think he's wrong on what they want being to mean. I also don't think he's wrong about the sense of the initial wonder. We'll get to, I think that there's a little bit more going on in that than just frozen at the level of the beings undifferentiated. The beings are being differentiated, and they want to know why. What's special about the beings as opposed to the mere appearances? That's the fundamentally Greek question, right? That's why you get, metaphors like the cave, right? It's because there's a notion of there being a solid underlying somewhere if I could just get to it, but I'm distracted by surface images that are ephemeral. Okay.
So I thought you were going to tell us why they didn't thematize the clearing.
I'm telling you that this is how they thematize the clearing.
Okay.
I don't think that this is not thematizing the clearing. I think the first thing they find about the clearing is you need to find something reliable in the clearing. There are elements of the clearing which are deceptive. There are elements of the clearing which cannot be relied upon, and the search for being is the search for the reliable in the clearing. And the beings that arise that are stable enough to be captured in words, that are enough to be gathered by logos, that is the being that is being distinguished from merely sense perception as intellectual perception of all the later Greeks, right? From Parmenides to Socrates to Aristotle, they're all trying to focus on how can I get to the stable and reliable that I can count upon out of the sea of appearances and opinions. They think of that as precisely where the open actually is. They think of humanity as the being that by reason can arrive at that stable.
So you're saying that once they settled on reason, they never went back to look at truth as unveiling.
No, I think they
now have truth as reason. That's
I'm saying there's two senses of unveiling. There's the unveiling merely to sense perception, and there's the unveiling to the mind, to noetic perception, to nous as opposed to aesthesis. And I'm saying that they believe that that openness to aesthesis is what reason is about. Yes, that is how they then go down the line of creating systems constructed on top of that belief in reason. But they do not think of that as not being engaged with the clearing. They think of it as being engaged with the clearing. They've just already zoomed past the mere perceptibility of phenomena. They're already trying to get at something deeper than surface phenomena. But they still think of that as being in the clearing. Okay, why does this matter? It matters because it's not clear that the steps they took in that resolution are as questionable as Heidegger presents them here. He presents those questions as questionable because the question was never even raised. The structure of the clearing was never even interrogated. He can disagree with how the Greeks interrogated it. He can disagree with what the Greeks, but he has to actually engage with them to do that. And instead he's saying they never considered it. I don't think that's true. I think they did consider it, and they came to very definite conclusions. And people who wanted to focus on the phenomenal perception in the sense of sense perception were there among them, and they lost the arguments, right? Deservedly lost them. Okay. Now I think that there is still an accent in what Heidegger is after that wasn't really there in the Greeks, and that he is, the notion of thinking of this as an essential occurrence, as a process, is his own, and also the notion of thinking of the openness of the beings, not just from the standpoint of our perceiving them, but on the standpoint of them shining into truth as knowable, something like that, as something that happens from the being side. I think those are both accents which are very much his. So he has a philosophical voice in this discussion, and it's not the same as what the Greeks considered, but it's not because they didn't look at the problem. It's a gross oversimplification to say they just didn't look at the problem, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Thoughts or comments on any of that? Okay. We should at least read the section on what he says about being, because I think this is, as I mentioned before, as an active philosophical interpretation of leaping into how someone else sees the world, this is quite good. This is 112 to 113. This is the part Clara was saying you almost got to, right? It's the very last sentence on 112, and the continuation of the chapter. The full paragraphs are on 113. Being as such impressed the Greeks as the constant, that which stands in itself over and against what falls and collapses. Notice there's already trying to get at the reliable. Being the Greeks' experience as the constant in the sense the persistent over and against the changing of what merely arises and then again disappears, not the fleeting, in other words. So that's not just the appearing, it has to last. The beingness of beings, that means constancy in the double sense of persistence and durations. Beings as the constant understood in this way in opposition to change and decay, are therefore entirely what is present, opposed to everything absent and all mere dissolution. He's focusing there on the present, but I think the dissolution is a little bit more essential because it's not simply the present. The things which are threatened with dissolution are the things which are mortal. There's a note of mortality in the things which are rejected as not being to the Greeks. I think there's a line in Nietzsche somewhere, I think it's in Beyond Good and Evil, where he says, in our internal subjective sense, we think of being as alive because we cannot imagine how something dead could be. I think that there's a little bit of that here. Okay. Constancy and especially presence posits back on itself whatever comes into existence as constant and present, but they do not posit it away. They install it in itself as the uprightness of the form versus the deformity of all confusion. The constant, what is present out of itself, informed in itself, unfolds out of itself and for itself, its contour and its limit. That's very Aristotelian, by the way. Versus everything merely floating away and limitless. Constancy, presence, form, and limit, all these, especially in the simplicity of their reciprocal relations, belong to and determine what resounds in the Greek word physis as the designations of beings and their beingness. I would say it resounds even more in ousia than in physis, but I think that is definitely what the Greeks, down to Aristotle, heard in being, or especially ousia. Thoughts on any of that? Did anyone else highlight that section or find it? I think Leon called this out as particularly useful. Two things I want to point out. One is there's an accent in there on being as being more on the natural and divine side and less on the mortal and human side. Truth, not opinion. Lasting, not ephemeral. Immortal, not mortal. These are concepts that line up for the Greeks because there's a projection image of them, divine, human, right? Okay. The other thing that strikes me about that passage is that the word physis is like an afterthought in it. Physis is not talking about that. Physis, the word, okay, it's a Greek word with a sis at the end, which means it's like analysis or paralysis or anything else. It's something makes itself X, okay, but the foo at the beginning is saying grow, appear, arise, right? So arising presence is usually people try to gloss it to get away from the later Latin understandings of nature. Nature means being born, and that's only a side interpretation on top of it. It doesn't originally mean being born. It means arising, appearing, growing. It has roots like that go all the way to India, right? With slight letter transformations, but to the thing which grows and grows of itself and grows to appear of itself. That's at bottom what physis means. In that, there is not yet all of these other notions of stability, but the emerging of itself in truth into its form and limit and contour, so to speak, as what it is. That's there in the word, and it stays in our notion of natural things as opposed to artificial things, or true things as opposed to fake things, or appearances. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, I also highlighted this, and going back to physis, and especially later versus techne, there is here that says present out of itself and form in itself, and it's kind of, it says install it in itself, and it's kind of like this in itself. To me it points to physis. It's the right word for me. It's
the in itself part is a very German formulation of it. It's almost Hegelian, but the only part that's that in the Greek is just the fact that it's one of these middle voiced cis things like analysis or synthesis. Synthesis is making together, analysis is making apart, whatever. The cis at the end of it is that the actually growing to its limits and installing itself in itself is a notion you get in Aristotle. That's definitely what he means by form as final cause, right? Something like that. But that's very late in the Greek understanding of these things. You don't necessarily have that full, growing into its final form, and the form and the formal cause and the final cause in most natural things are the same, he'll say in the physics, right? That's very Aristotelian. So of Aristotle, yes, that's spot on, but I don't know that Thales heard that in the word physis, for example. Sorry, you want more on that, or? Okay. I think that gloss on being to the Greeks is one of the most essential contributions of the part we read. Okay. Okay. I'm realizing here from some of the other themes here about Aletheia, we probably do have to do the Parmenides. We probably do have to do the Parmenides after question concerning technology.
Actually, if we still stay, if we want to change, the next paragraph says there is something that is missing, and he said at the end of the next paragraph, I think that's also very, very relevant in case we are not done with, or we are done with this. I would like to go back to that.
Yeah, he says it's all dominated by what is named last, unconcealed, right? So
Yes.
it's physis as standing into the open, into the light. So we're not yet getting the notion of emerging from the background in the gloss on being, I mean. When we get to the section on wonder, he will have the picture of the background, where by background I mean the indeterminate chaos in which beings and non-beings are still mingled and uncertain, right? There is wonder before the as a whole, the everything as a whole, so to speak. but there is not yet the fully distinguished beings from non-beings, something like that. But that's for wonder. Why does this matter? There's two separate things here. There's emerging into possible perception at all, and there's being stable, reliable enough to count as being in the sense just glossed above. These are two different things. Yes, the Greeks are putting them together because truth is the arising into something like solidness, not just the arising into something like perceivable. Now, yes, Heidegger wants to put more of the accent on the perceivable at all. We just went through why some of the Greek philosophers didn't think that was sufficient, right? We also talked a little bit, not this time, but previous times, about the etymologies of the word aletheia itself as unconcealment, which is the proper reading, I think. Unconcealment, discovery, as a close English sense of a word that would have a similar kind of connection to truth as unconcealedness. But unconcealedness is, unforgetting is privative of lethe, and lethe is something like the unseen, right? The not unseen. So yes, there's a primitive element there, which is an appeal to perceivable as such. In this section here, when he gets to the discussion of nous, he will call nous and known perception. He did that in the Essence of Truth book too. There's another Greek word for perception, aesthesis. These are not the same word. Known means something like intellectual perception, but it is not simply perception. Okay. So where I can agree with him, aletheia as a basic determination of beings themselves, that beings appear. They don't just, well, it's not even just they appear. Beings, not just appearances, but beings appear and are in truth, is the way a Greek would put it, right? Illusions may appear, but they aren't in truth. That only later Greeks necessarily say that, but they do. Okay. He says, then the task of Greeks will be to say what beings are, to ask this more clearly, more foundationally, more manifoldly. I agree, that is the question they gave, the problem they gave themselves. There's a reason they gave themselves that problem or that question, and the reason is that you can perceive things which aren't real. The problem of illusion, of opinion, of the unstable, of the changing was the Greek problem that made them pursue what the beings are further in the direction they pursued it, so to speak. Okay. Are the distinctions between being and perception that the Greeks are making here clear enough or not? I need to know whether or not people are hearing an uncertainty, an equivocation in the word unconcealedness, because it can mean either simply perceptible to sense, or it can mean actually being grasped, appreciated noetically in truth, something like that. Leon?
The way I read it is that obviously the aesthesis is the sense perception. So a visual could be a visual perception, for example. The noetic perception is how things appear in their sense and in their truth, and how they manifest to the noetic sort of intellectual apprehension. So a completely different level. So it is a different level,
but you need a theory of mind to have those levels separated.
Yeah.
Right. It's not simply in the thing itself. And yeah.
So we see an individual thing. We see a tree, and we can see it in its vision, but it also has a sense in noetic perception as well. And its sense could be something completely different from every time you see it. That noetic essence could be different.
Well, I like your example because this takes us to another book we did together quite a while ago, the what is called thinking, where he has his famous example of standing before the tree in bloom and what is happening there at that event. And he will claim that the scientific view that wants to reduce it to a bunch of gossamer charges floating in empty space is that version of the tree that the systematizing intellect wants to make over it isn't the tree, and that thought has not let the treeing be as the tree that it is.
Because the tree could reveal itself just completely differently. It reveals itself as shade on a hot day. I've seen that example somewhere. It could reveal itself as a dwelling place of an ancient spirit. That would be the tree in truth to noetic perception.
To Heidegger, the tree in truth is precisely not the scientific theory of the tree, but is if I can put it this way, the orienting and attractive true entity on which the consciousness or anything as subjective as that is itself actually oriented and pulled into relation to. It is not about the theories of the tree, and it's not about the lived experiences of the tree. This is, like, to me, core Heidegger, that he is trying to get away entirely from the notion that different experiences of the tree are different pictures of trees running around inside heads. Or as he puts it, does the tree stand on our head, or do we stand on the earth? We stand on the earth, is his answer, right? So
truth is a property of the thing itself, right?
And of the relation, and of the relation we have with it. The unveiling includes its relation to Dasein, but not Dasein's theories.
Yeah, the tree.
Dasein's theories are built.
The tree reveals itself in its truth in a whole relational context, and we sort of accept the manifestation of that noetic essence.
We do not always accept that.
Well,
sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't.
But kind of like that's what he's leading us to sort of to let the thing be the thing that it is.
Yes, but even when we
has
don't,
to be sorry.
Even when we don't let the tree be what it is, it still is what it is. The theories about the tree are never the tree, Heidegger. Again, I think this is brass tacks Heidegger. So I think that this matters, and this matters for why we're going from Physis towards, we're going to travel from Aletheia through Physis to Techne. And it also may have to do something with why we're reading the question concerning technology next. And it may also have something to do with Claire's question about representation, right? Representation has a tactical meaning from Descartes on, that it is something like your subjective understanding of the mental image and impressions that you have formed of something might be not in perfect correspondence with the external thing, but they are your internal conception of it. And about that, if you're honest with yourself, you cannot be wrong. Or as Descartes puts it, his clear and distinct ideas are true. And on that level, the question that arises concerning representations is, do they correspond with the external thing that the idea is about? So you have a correspondence theory of truth, you have truth as representation, and you have this subjective move. You're only making judgments of the contents of your consciousness instead of the external world, which makes error about it impossible, but at the cost of severing your connection to transcendent truth from Heidegger's point of view. In other words, it becomes a subjective property of self-reports of observational worlds, something like that. That's the characteristic move that makes modern philosophy distinct from older philosophy. There's a critical version of that after Kant, which will, again, move further in that direction and reject even the Descartes level as being dogmatic. But there is a continually moving of the truth claims of philosophy to more and more subjective poles, and arriving at greater and greater certainty as a result, but greater and greater certainty in a more and more solipsistic context. Okay. That's a very long way of saying that the representation is both a particular term of art in particular philosophies, and it's also a trend or direction that Heidegger is pointing out. That trend or direction is towards making truth into something humanly constructed inside the subjective pole, matter of theory. This may culminate in on the one hand, in Heidegger, not in Heidegger, in Hegel, in the idea that we are living inside the world of our constructions. We live in a world of art, of what our mind has constructed as the truth of the world, and to the further radicalization of that thought in Nietzsche, which is that those thoughts that we inhabit are not the truth of the world, but the kind of error without which creatures like us cannot live. In other words, they're biologically informed, evolutionarily informed, pragmatically informed, if you like, tools of the drives rather than true pictures of external reality, something like that. So this is a chain that, from Heidegger's point of view, representation steps down, and at each step is getting further and further from trying to be directly connected to a transcendent truth that is independent of the mind, and less listening to it and more dictating to it or constructing it. From Heidegger's point of view, the end of this process is when truth is regarded as a tool or construct for our purposes, which we'll get to next time, that has no necessary connection to anything other than our purposes. I don't know if that helps for trying to tie into this to the representation question. Sorry, Leon, your hand is still up. I don't know if it's a leftover or.
No, it's a leftover.
Okay. Okay. I go through some of this because Heidegger himself goes through some of this connection to the modern philosophy and the contrivance business. This is like 122, 123. He talks about lived experiences as contrivances. So this may also take us to Isabel's question. He gives the example of the boxing match that is a lived experience, not for the boxers, because they at least still box, meaning they do an activity other than having a lived experience. The having a lived experience is what the spectators do. They consume it as spectacle. What is the point of all that? The point of all that section is that we are moving towards viewing the things that happen as contrivances of our reason for the sake of the satisfaction of effective pragmatic relations on the one hand and subjective whims on the other, right? Subjective whim is what the demand function becomes here. And it's what the spectators of the lived experience of the spectacle are seeking in going to the boxing match. They do not seek to box. All right, and all of that he is. Why is he making light of that? He's making light of that because there's a severing of a connection to a anything like a personal experience of truth. When I say personal, I mean authentic, your own, rather than performative public. Okay. This will also go along with the downplaying of systems, the claim that there is a background of uncertainty on which we construct our theories and systems goes along with a downplaying of the role of systems. When a system like Hegel's is claiming to be all of reality, it's claiming to be truth, you have a different attitude towards it as system than if you think of it as a perspectival poem of Hegel that is thrown over the world, but is always just an essay into the mystery that doesn't really, has no hope of ever fully understanding it, something like that. Okay. What does he get next from this notion of Greek understanding of truth, and after going through the spectacle business and lived experience? We get to man the rational animal. We're headed towards wonder, but first we have to get through man the rational animal. Do people have comments on the man the rational animal section and what he was doing in it? What is the man as the rational animal section doing here? Anyone else notice that? Dan, did you have a take on the man, the rational animal? Dan is on mute.
Well, it's not ready, but it's first. It's you state that you turn man into some kind of substance or some kind of present of hand attribute, and Heidegger is that more fundamental. I think that's, to me, like whatever you say about the man as something definitive, you especially in this kind of formulation, you and then of course it's a combination of animal, it's sentiment, and on top of reason, and then of all this rationality that culminate in manipulability and technology and
what does he object to in the understanding of man as rational animal? What is being lost? He mentions something that is left behind completely, lost completely. Josh?
Well, by taking the empirical route, man is the rational animal. Man then is linked with other animals. One then understands man biologically, empirically. What is lost is being, because you don't being. You can't understand those disciplines on the basis of which we say man is an animal and a particular kind of an animal, a rational animal. You can't ground them without asking the question of being.
Is he objecting to the fact that the sciences are inadequately grounded as a result, or?
Yeah, by grounded I mean, I don't mean grounded in some sort of apodictic, Husserlian phenomenology, but I mean grounded by they don't ask the question of being, they assume it. They assume a particular stance.
I don't think it's particularly the stance that bothers him. What's bothering him is man has lost the mission of being the place or site at which being appears.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
So what is so, if we go this way, what is so valued by Heidegger about that aspect of man, such that it's eclipse or effacement by other elaborated theories of consciousness or something like it would displace it? What is the value in directly understanding man as the place or site in which being appears for Heidegger? Why is loss of that so important to him? Isabel?
Yes, I think that the minute we in history think of man as a rational animal, we have lost the mystery. We have lost the I don't know. And not only that, but it's abhorrent to us to have the I don't know, because man as a rational animal must know and must make everything knowledgeable to him. And what is lost besides the mystery is the fact that man as a rational animal is an agent. Heidegger wants to distance himself from that when he is the opening or the appropriated by being. Man is no longer the agent, and when man is agent, we're in nihilism. It's finito. It's the end.
Yes, but why? You're not wrong. Why is it if man takes agency for his own, what is missing? You're right that he experiences something. Exactly. You're right that he experiences there as being something nihilistic in man taking agency for his own. By the way, I would mark in passing that the rational animal, if you put enough accent on the animal, may not know very much, even in the rational animal version, because he may be sunk in the sea of errors, because his thoughts are, confused motions in the brains of a bewildered ape, right? You can have mystery for rational animal reasons, but I agree with you that what is missing is something like a connection to truth as something that is mission-like, that to which man is sent. What's missing is the orders from on high to reveal being, if you get me. And he mentions in passing this. He gives a gloss where he includes even the Christian version of this in the Middle Ages, when you go through creatures and the importance of the salvation of this individual creature. He, at the very end of that paragraph, says, already all connection to man as the site where being appears has been lost. So, okay. I think this is, again, core Heidegger, that there's something about a connection to truth as a assigned mission to man that is Heidegger wouldn't even call it a good, he would call it the condition for the possibility of anything good being arising, something like that. Otherwise, you're in the realm of, in a realm of an arbitrary. This may amount to something like an ungrounded ought is not an ought, something like that. But yes, I agree that he is trying to move away from a willful. I think those willfuls come only later. I think in the original Aristotelian formulation of rational animal, the rational was the highest calling in man. The contemplative life was what Aristotle was about, right? He didn't have all of these later historical distancings that get applied on top of it. But Heidegger sees that as a steep, slippery slope, right? But the thing that is missed along the way is a mission of truth for man, as such, something like that. Josh?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit, because I take your point about you use the word arbitrary. So there is this sort of arbitrariness that underlies, say, empirical groundings or attempts to ground sort of humanity. Say, humanity is a biological organism, and biology is sort of making use of evolutionary impulses or shapings, and those are contingent. It's the roll of the dice, so that makes it arbitrary and subject to chance. So how would you distinguish or articulate this non-arbitrariness in a way that does not sort of subsume it within some sort of a teleological way of thinking?
I think there is a bit of teleology in the sense that he has a notion of a calling or highest calling for man as steward of being or steward of the truth. And I think that came out especially at the end of Contributions. I think it comes out here when he's talking about the decline. The decline that follows the understanding of man as rational animal. Man as rational animal initially is still something like at his highest capable of truth, something like that. But through the intermediary of creature, and then he explains that even at that stage, the connection to the appearance of beings is lost, and he goes to a modern recapitulation of it, where he's thinking of, I think, of the German idealists especially, that make the world that man inhabits more and more a contrivance. He says contrivance over and over again here. The man comes to live in the house of his own contrivances, and that means he's no longer living in the natural world. It means he's no longer living in truth. In fact, he's living in the constructed city of his fiction instead of the natural world beyond it, where both truth and mystery are. So, is there something non-arbitrary about living outside the city? Yes and no. The no part is because it's shot through with uncertainty still. It's not the arbitrariness of uncertainty of the will deciding this or that, but it is a dependence upon a fundamentally unknowable mystery. So in that sense, it doesn't satisfy a longing for stability or lockdown, lack of possible variation, if anyone has one. But its reasons for that are that it is trying to remain tied to, coupled to a truth it does not create and therefore does not control. Does that help?
The metaphor of height, what does that provide? What does that contribute? Because I'm trying to kind of see how how to relate that kind of language to overtly theological.
I mean, compared to an overtly theological view, it's putting something like truth in the place of the God that is being served, but that service is to a truth that is a mystery and therefore an uncontrollable. There's an uncontrolled, free, transcendental that is at the pole of this duty, but the duty is to let be, hear, witness, whatever, that truth. But this is thought of as a mission that is above and outside the missions of culture, if you get me, or the missions of technology or system.
It's not an ethical height in the sense of a good, right? I mean, it doesn't. Yeah.
It's problematic because, I mean, Platonists can come in here and read lots of goods into what Heidegger is doing. It's not his explicit intention. It functions like a good for him, but it's not his explicit intention that it's like a Platonic idea of the good. But there is a better and worse here. I mean, in the essay we read back in December, he talked about a pre-given directedness, that there's something from the experience itself. In an open comportment, the fact that the comportment is open means that it wants to conform to the thing to which it is comporting, right? Part of a comportment being open is that it is taking its directives from the thing it is trying to understand and not giving it to it. In the contributions, he also distinguished between mastery and violence. Violence is when the will is substituted for what the thing itself demands. Personal will being substituted for when mastery would listen to what the thing itself demands or let the being be. So these accents are all through Heidegger. He does not avoid them. He's not studiously steering away from such goods. The other place that a Platonist would discover lots of grounding in goods for Heidegger is where he talks about need. He talks about every fundamental comportment being based upon some need. In the case of wonder, there is a need which is a felt distress at the not having a way in or a way out of the wonder experience. At the beginning of his own essay, he talked about it as this experience of restraint. There's a need in that experience of restraint. I would say that in his interpretation of the Greeks, when he's talking about what they saw in being, I can hear in that a fundamental disposition or basic disposition need for something reliable, something to cling on to in their understanding of being. So what am I getting at? You can find ways in which needs, values, orientations shape each of these more philosophical experiences. That doesn't mean that you put them into a framework in which the good is controlling and over them. It means you're noticing something about need, a pre-given directedness that brings its own proper, any of these things. from Heidegger's point of view, that he tries to think about these things in terms of attunements, in terms of dispositions, in terms of the way in which that, if you put it this way, that somewhat more feeling side of human nature is itself a vehicle for truth. It is not simply a subjective distortion or something like that. It is itself in touch with and in tune with the being into which it is thrown and it is part of. Sorry, Tausif?
Yeah, so please, maybe I'm going on some tangency over here, but when you explained that man as the rational animal, what is missing here is the um, a mission-like characteristic, right, with the truth. So it gave me like a perspective of a Kierkegaardian perspective of religious way of life, like where he tells the story of Abraham, like it's beyond the culture. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, does the Heidegger also
So
is sort
I
of
mean,
building up? Yeah.
Complicated, but you're not completely wrong. So there's definitely sections in Being in Time where some of the stuff where he talks about the call and the conscience have lots of Kierkegaardian echoes, and there's things about the call in Contributions which can sound Kierkegaardian. It is not the same because the overall context is not the Christian context you get in Kierkegaard for sure. But there is this notion of something like a felt call that demands to be listened to, that when listened to, the result is a attunement to the higher, the intrinsically worthy, and the reason this height is proved out, if I can put it this way, by the fact that it issues in truth. It doesn't issue in willfulness, a desire for mastery, manipulation of the world. It issues in letting beings be, Gelassenheit, truth, and dedication to truth, something like that. So how much of that is Kierkegaardian? Kierkegaard sometimes downplays the association of any of these things with reason. He's got Socrates as a lower figure in his pantheon of people to emulate, if that makes sense. But there are definitely some points of contact. I think it's fair to say that there's elements of Kierkegaard that influence Heidegger, but he, in other places, he will say Kierkegaard's greatness lies in the fact that he's a religious thinker. If to speak in this way is not already a misunderstanding, something like that. But you can find other places where he talks about the Kierkegaard connection. But is there a notion of higher calling in both of them? For sure. It's just the calling that Heidegger thinks of himself dedicated to is a awakeness that sees and declares truth as it presents itself, something like that. Dan? Good question.
Yeah, all this. There is a Nietzsche saying that he said something like the 19th century is not the victory of science, but is the victory of method over science. And it's this kind of like the method, procedure, system. And it seems like the modernity and what we call rational and certainty and everything like that and subjectivity is focused on that. And that goes very much against what's Aletheia. Like Aletheia, it happens there outside us, and it's kind of what you just mentioned. There is something greater than us, and we are under it, and that's what kind of this reason is messing up. It's not letting us see the Aletheia in a way. All this.
You're not wrong. I mean, I'm trying to get at this. So there's a Eastern philosophical concept useful here, right? The Tao that can be explained is not the Tao, right? If you can write it down or turn it into a system so that anyone copying it can do it, it cannot contain fundamental philosophical insight. That's the claim, something like that. The routinized part, the part that can be turned into a procedure, the part you can program a computer to do, certain current ones aside, is not thought. right? The thoughtful is the part of that you can't routinize, is the Weberian term, right? But certainly modern science and modern technology as a way of knowing works by a division of labor that does not require all the people that serve it to know all of the truths that it arrives at. In fact, it can arrive at a continent of truth that no one mind can survey because of that division. And there is an estrangement from the truths that it discovers involved in that. Method and technique are about trying to make it possible for people who do not get all of it to yet make their contribution. Do you ever get back to the synoptic mind that can take all of it in, appreciate the truth that results, survey it as a whole, learn from it? It may be doubted. It is something worth fearing, let's put it that way. You can also talk about how this enters into the ethical lives of the individual scientists, right? Do they maintain a connection to truth for its own sake as part of their calling, or do they become careerists in a business of production of papers, right? That sort of thing. And Heidegger will talk about that. Weber talked about that in Science as a Vocation, that danger. If you want another place where this problematic is talked about. We'll get at some of that in the technology section. However, I mean, we need to understand these things on a scale. Originally, rational animal just wanted to say, among the living things, man is the special thing that has mind, that has noesis, that has ability to touch truth with its mind. And when you're talking about a Plato or Aristotle, that's all they meant by it. By the time you're talking about Nietzsche, that is not remotely all he means by it. He means it's an animal with thought as its method, or thought as a method. And the animal is definitely in control by the time you're at Nietzsche. At the time of Hegel, it may be balanced, or the world is rational, but it's rational because it was made that way by a mind that needed to be rational. By the time of Nietzsche, the faith in that rationality is gone, and it's just a perspectival view that is pragmatically helpful for the animal projecting it, right? In that sense, the pragmatic aspects of truth have taken over, as we'll see in the essay next time. Where is mere techne in the Greek sense on that continuum? It's certainly not all the way at the right end, not all the way at the later end of the Nietzsche end of it. Techne is the notion that there is knowledge of things that is in know-how of how you interact with them, something like that. That is not yet at the reducing what they are to what can be done with them. The arts were a model for knowledge for the Socratics, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They were also trying to go further from that, especially Aristotle, in terms of what could be made into routine or made into method. We're not all the way to the technique part here, but I see his hands still up. Isabel?
Yes. Again, about a man as the rational animal. Yes. One aspect, and I hope you haven't spoken about this already, is that in the first beginning, the Greeks were able to sustain the thought of man as perceiver and preserver. However, as history went on, this was lost, and as you were pointing to the different stages, ending with Nietzsche, man became the rational animal. What is interesting is that he says that the Greeks were unable unable to sustain that original grasp of being. They were unable to sustain. And if I don't know where else I read, but Heidegger says that it was their destiny. It was their destiny to, so to speak, get the ball rolling.
So he does say that their mission is to understand what are the beings or what are beings, and they get that going. He does say that the staying on that focus kept them from looking into the open itself. We talked through what is true and what might be overstated about that case before. He does say they're not able to sustain the connection to man as the site where truth happens, something like that. I think that could be considerably later than he puts it. I mean, he basically is putting this like after Aristotle, it's done, right? And that is a somewhat uncharitable reading of ancient philosophy, in my opinion. Certainly, you're already getting moves in the direction of other factors, certainty, representation, being more important to it by the time of early modern philosophy. I think early modern philosophy is still very much dedicated to finding truth, however. I think Heidegger is right in some of his strictures against Cartesianism and later philosophy as making moves that are knowable subjectivist errors that produce a kind of break with truth in a way. But it's not because they aren't trying to reach it. You only get to a break with trying to reach it at post Hegel, really. Hegel is, and Heidegger in the Nietzsche lectures says this about it, that even in Hegel you have it's still truth that's the ideal, but that doesn't mean he thinks he's reaching it. Anyway, the Heidegger has his criticisms of the history of philosophy, and in many cases they're just. In many cases they're sustained by this whole understanding of the structure of metaphysics as the particular, with the particular kind of structure or form it has to fill out, so to speak, in which the kinds of truths that are accessible to man, what man is as a result, the basic nature of being, are all filled in, so to speak. And that structure has been played out in its changes from, honestly, the pre-Socratics down to Nietzsche, and including Nietzsche, who thought he might have thought he was getting out of it, but it wasn't, something like that. That sort of picture of the history of philosophy, it's contentious in parts. I think that it is much easier to accept the more sweeping criticisms of the later portions of that development, if I put it that way, than to identify the earliest turns in it, right? It's easier to see that there's something going wrong at the time when truth is the kind of error without which animals like us cannot live, than it is to object to the definition of rational animal in Aristotle. And the claim that there is a straight line between them makes a lot of the things along the way look more inevitable than they probably were. I don't think that Aristotle is just Nietzsche with 2 more steps taken in a line of argument. He's not. He's adding something fundamentally different, new, even alien to Aristotle. So I would claim that history does something beyond just unfold what was there at the beginning. But that's me talking. That's not Heidegger's read on the history. Josh?
Yeah, going back to the metaphor sort of height,
Yes.
in terms of what reveals itself or unfolds itself from
Yes.
From beings. If you with Nietzsche and sort of this notion of the roll of the dice, which is so important to Nietzsche, you have you don't. I mean, the notion of height doesn't. It can't really be made use of there because he sort of levels it down. But
I mean, Nietzsche has his own notion of height. I mean, his notion of height, is there expressed, pretty strongly in Zarathustra and in the late writings, and it's even there in some ways already in the Untimely Meditations. He's got it. The notion of the strength of a soul in Nietzsche is how much of the past it can digest and fully incorporate into itself, something like that. The spirit that can not be ruled by and yet can fully assimilate the whole of its past is a spirit on a higher plane, a higher level for Nietzsche than one that cannot. And he is very much a philosopher of orders of rank, and he thinks that the philosophers who do that have a greater will to power and a natural title to rule that others do not. Right? He's a very hierarchical philosopher that way. He's just the hierarchy he's talking about is an intellectual, spiritual one, so to speak, and not one of any conventional legalistic structures, if you get me.
Yeah.
But he's definitely hierarchical. He's not leveler in that regard. He does claim that within the philosophers, there are competing drives within them, and each tries to tyrannize in its own spirit, so to speak. But the philosopher himself is the whatever peace he has made among those drives. But again, that's not leveling. It's still a sharp rank ordering. People who get egalitarian consequences from Nietzschean leveling and relativism usually are after him and not him, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'm saying that Richard Rorty and Nietzsche do not agree on hierarchy and orders of rank. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I was trying to put this in relation to, say, Foucault and Deleuze. But yeah, that may be.
Foucault's funny because he's in the middle. Yeah. He's in the middle. But go, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. Well, so what I was aiming at was here in terms of this sort of this calculus between, in the between, that is to say, between,
yes.
If the height is contributed by that which is, the mystery, which cannot be, let me put this, in which the contribution of what would have been the subject and is no longer the subject for Heidegger, if that can't be the source of this height, or this teleological gesture, then if it's coming from the beings themselves, then it seems
not
to
coming
me
from beings in the plural, but from being in the singular with a Y. But keep going.
But if it's the point I guess I'm trying to make is that if it's coming from something that is that is not in the in between, but in one side of the in between, which is something that is independent in some sense, or then you're back to a kind of a representational view of, or a correspondence view of truth, because you are relying on something intrinsic to the outside, which gives it its height.
So you're correct that it is relying on something intrinsic that is an outside, but it is not going to get you to a correspondence theory because it's not about an individual being and a conformity to it. There is a following a pre-given directedness coming from the openness of the comportment, according to Heidegger. So what this issue's in? This issue's in the relations of height are revealed in the how deep into ground the thought goes, and especially the questioning goes. He makes the claim in our little reading that the posing of the questions includes the kinds of things that can count as the answers. So it's the questioning which is decisive, but the openness and depths of the questioning is what is contributing the degree of groundedness, the degree of futurity, the degree of the depth of the history that is being touched, if that makes sense. So there are plenty of relatively superficial, relatively surface happenings and decisions that are will proceed on their own way, but they will not touch and are just carried along by the unchanged decisions from the past that are not revisited. Just as he talks about the destiny of the West set by the Greeks until the question of the essence of truth is reopened, that not having been reopened in the meantime sets a level of influence over that past decision will have on the future. The difficulty of reaching that level again is also a measure of how many future decisions will be caught in that past decision. They will all happen in its shadow because the later thinkers do not reach to that level again. You cannot influence things that are on a level below the one that you reach. So, and this is not a question of influencing willfully. It's you can't influence in this space of decision where history is decided, so to speak. That's the view that is being presented here. So it's the human beings are not deciding which of these levels is more decisive. The articulations of the matter themselves are, and whether or not they reach down to the level of a more or less essential question, right? If they try to reach such a level inauthentically when it's not a live question for them upon which a future decision actually turns, they will produce frivolity, and it will not change anything. It will not redirect anything. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so.
My point is, I don't think Heidegger is saying any of these things because he is advocating for them. He's just trying to tell you that's the way things actually are, right? History is determined by the depth of the thought that are reached by the thinkers in their engagement, their honest, direct engagement with the truth about the problems they're considering. And in the absence of engagement at that depth, history doesn't change. It keeps going the way it was going. Claire?
Okay, so I just want to see if I'm understanding this correctly. It seems like there's like two like motions or continuums of things in which objects are in Aristotelian sense reaching their potential or coming into their final form, and also humans are going through some kind of continuum of unconcealment, or like that and at some point there's like a reaching of truth when those two things connect.
The humans or Daseins are the place or site in which the unveiledness of the truth about the beings occurs, according to Heidegger. So they're the reaching unconcealment is the same as being in unconcealment, being in the open, experiencing the openness that the beings themselves already possess, something like that. The being in time version of this would be we're always already plugged into the world, right? We don't have to go outside our heads to be in the world. We're receiving the content of our existence from the truth of the beings around us all the time, and that relation can just be more or less thoughtful, more or less our own, more or less overlaid with superficiality and just doing what everyone else does. But again, that's all being in time era. Here, it is always that relation of Dasein to truth is always happening, but there can be he's trying to tell the story of the history of understandings of that essence of truth. And he's putting that as the essence of truth has a history. Well, it's not that the essence of truth has a history. The truth of it has a history, meaning how much of it is uncovered, how much of it is veiled, how much of it is seen, how much of it is unknown. So there is a process of discovery of the nature of truth. And from Heidegger's point of view, the most essential occurrences in history are when advances or retreats are made in that subject matter, right? When mankind's understanding of his relation to truth undergoes change. Does that help?
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, in the Nietzsche lectures, he lays out a whole understanding of this structure in metaphysics in the particular span of history from the Greeks to Nietzsche, where in each of these dispensations of philosophy, each of these philosophical eras, you have a philosophical teaching will lay out what it thinks the nature of truth is, what it thinks the nature of being is, what it thinks that the essential aspect of human nature is as a result, and how does being essentially occur. And you can go through and fill out the form for that, for what it is for Nietzsche and Hegel and Kant and Descartes and so on. And each of them will have a translated understanding of what the essence of humanity is, based upon the felt, perceived, etc. answers to those other questions. That sort of meta-historical structure of how philosophy and philosophical views influence all of those things is kind of what that whole, well, at least the sections 3 and 4 of that of those lectures are kind of about. Anyway, it's a large topic, but that's understanding the history of philosophy on sort of that level is a big part of Heidegger's work in the 30s. I think that we started on the lectures books 3 and 4 of the Nietzsche stuff while we were going online, so there are some lectures on that, but I don't think they started beginning at 3. But there's some of the first things on the channel. We just hadn't started recording yet. We already moved online for it. But if you want to see more of the stuff about his analysis of kind of philosophy of history kind of stuff, that might be useful stuff to look at, besides just looking at the books themselves, volumes 3 and 4, especially of the Nietzsche lectures, is what I'm talking about. Okay, and by the way, we'll get other versions of at least the end of that in the Questions Considering Technology, which is not about that whole history, but its last phase, if you get me. That's for our lecture for next time. Okay. I want to jump ahead to wonder. So the claim is that what is the claim? The claim is that every grounding attunement, every foundational attunement or grounding disposition, to use all 4 of the terms that Pete told us, sometimes it translated one way, sometimes the other, are always driven by some felt need. There's a felt need behind a basic disposition or a basic attunement. An attunement is only basic grounding if it is about the ground, if it is about a relation to the whole. So no relation to a single being counts as a grounding disposition. Grounding dispositions are dispositions towards the whole of being, something like that. And examples of grounding attunements, anxiety in being and time is a grounding attunement, right? Restraint in the other beginning, and he's saying wonder in the first beginning, are grounding attunements. They are attitudes towards the whole of being and to the whole question of being. Okay. What does he say the basic experience of wonder is? Just to make sure we've actually read the text. Some of us haven't, but someone want to give us exposition of what they think the basic experience of wonder is? Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, well, wonder is the in-between. I was struck at the similarity between his depiction of wonder here and prior descriptions of sort of the nothing, and how, anxiety sort of delivers us into this nothing. Because he talks about, with respect to wonder, sort of the distress that goes along with it, and reminds us that this distress is not to be thought of in terms, specifically in negative terms, but that it is, the in-between is this. It's a very rich kind of a phenomenon, because it is wonder is this. It puts us right there in the event of, I'd like to call it fecundity, right? Where there, where the usual is is always the unusual, the most unusual. And yeah, you know,
when you get to usual and unusual, you're starting to get the moments that he highlights in wonder. And but it's not simply between, and it's certainly not the anxiety of being in time about care or anything like that. There's a definite specific thing that is the wondering. Wondering is the not being able to find a way in or a way out of the state of amazement at that beings are, or that beings both are and are not in some sense. That the between you're talking about of becoming, being, nothing, appearance, any of that. But there is a sense of amazement, and amazement meaning a stunned inability to turn away from, pull away from, or reduce to normality the experience of the something like a felt uncertainty in things. Where that uncertainty is there they're arising at all. They're arising from a background or nothing, something like that, as well as an inability to pin down, something like that. So no way in, no way out of the amazement, no way in, no way out of the held by, the struck by. And if you've ever found yourself looking at a most ordinary thing and thinking not about that thing, but about the fact that it is, the fact that you are being amazed at all of that, you're going to have some sense of what he's talking about. There's an abstraction from the particulars of the experience to the generality of experience as such, of experience of reality, being, actuality, anything you want to call it, awareness of existence, that has it has the character of being in the unknown, right? So, but it is not felt, it does not have there could be an unpleasantness about the caughtness of it, but it is not a sense of distress in the sense of the anxiety of care and being in time, or even it is not a there is a positive moment to wonder in the awesomeness of what is being wondered at, right? There is a sense of something greater, and of being in some kind of attunement or in touch with a something greater, but a something greater whose unusualness cannot be evaded, something like that. Now, you're right, Josh, that he also relates that to the kind of philosophical distinction or lack thereof between beings and non-being, which is a more abstract sort of determination, an abstract philosophical sort of judgment sort of determination. The disposition itself is not about such determinations. He's trying to explain that it is prior to them. It doesn't have beings to latch onto and distinguish from non-beings because it is still before the arising, appearing as a unity itself, if that makes sense. I think that it's a moving description of wonder. I think it's one of the there are two things in the section we've read, the description of what being meant to the Greeks and the description of wonder here, that I think are the best parts in what we've read here. And there's, in a way, less contentious, more solid than the meaning of any of these things for history, or the reading of what the Greeks did or didn't manage to do, right? It is a moving and convincing description of the basic disposition phenomena itself. Do other people want to comment on what he says about wonder? So he says that wonder displaces man in the perception of beings as being into sustaining unconcealedness, belonging to the most unusual. There's a notion in cognitive science, if I can use this, of explored versus unexplored territory. Wonder is finding yourself in unexplored territory because you are at all and there is anything at all, something like that.
I wanted to read.
Okay, sure.
I forgot what page this was from. I think it's. Hold on. Let me. I'll get to the exact page. It was from 133, I think, where he says, "What is present and at hand counts as a being. Therefore, it is difficult for us, whenever we encounter something apparently negative, not only to see in it the positive, but also to conceive something more original, transcending that distinction." Which I think is what you were just talking about a minute ago. Before you get to the kinds of distinctions between, being or non-being, positive or negative, presence or absence, there is this, which I think what wonder and need capture is this prior, I don't know, state, if you will, right?
It's the in the midst. It's just
Yeah.
it calls it the in the midst. Right. So yeah, yes. There's a okay. One of the reasons I want to focus on the basic disposition part is because I think there is something in the Greek experience of both wonder and being, as he has elaborated it, that points to the direction that they will develop, that is, they, the Greeks, will develop the question of what are the beings. And it is not simply, that's wrong. It is starting from the state of wonder as he describes it. It is holding to the notion of aletheia as unveiledness as he describes it. It is focused on physis as arising, appearing. All of that remains. But it is, rather than distinguishing being from non-being, it is trying to distinguish being from meon, from appearance, from the only sort of is. It's trying to find the ground, the stable, the trustworthy, the solid. That's why we heard all those accents in the description of what being meant for the Greeks, right? In Anaximander, it's time, in as the thing which is stably contains all of the change. In Heraclitus, it's the common. People that live in their own opinions are like they're men asleep in their private worlds. The common, that is the light of common day that they all have together, says hen panta, one all, right? It is united in the, is gathered in the one, and that one is in the common. In Parmenides, it's in the necessity with which being is, as opposed to all mere appearance of mere opinion. In Plato, he wants to extend that to the ideas, the natural kinds. In Aristotle, you want to get to the nature of things themselves as what they cause of themselves, as distinguished from techne, as what men do that always only imitates what nature does. But in all these cases, and along the way, the sophists will distinguish between the natural and between physis and nomos. It's convention. Its convention is the great not being to the sophists, right? So the unstable, the changing, the private worlds, the sphere of opinion, the sphere of uncertainty, all of those things are being differentiated from the solid standing in itself. And that differentiation of the solid standing in itself upon which one can rely, which might even be another name for, to the Greeks, the immortal as opposed to the mortal. The need for that, it runs through not the wonder itself, but right after the wonder. The wonder is before and undifferentiated, but the differentiation is seeking the solid. It's seeking the lasting in that sea, so to speak. So I think that picture of the structure of Greek philosophical, motivation is accurate, and but you have to draw together the wonder base layer and the direction of the interpretation of being towards that which can be relied upon to get at what the Greeks are actually doing when they're asking the what are beings question. They're not just looking for beings as things which appear. They're not just looking for beings as, the everlasting flux. They're trying to find the stable, reliable, the thing that deserves beings in the way he describes in page 112, 113 that we went over. Thoughts or questions on that? No? You can easily marvel at the things which are just opinions. You can marvel at the things which just change, the shiny object. You can marvel at mere imaginings. That's not the wonder that the Greeks are about, right? Okay. And why is it awe? Why is there astonishment and awe at this? The astonishment and awe is because the ephemeral is easy, right? The natural has a strength that man longs for, but does not naturally or on his own have. That his thought does not on its own naturally have. Okay. If no one else has other comments on wonder, I want to get to techne at the end, or near the end, because that's where he goes from physis to techne. And the first thing you have to understand is that bringing in techne here is definitely the Socratics primarily. There are some of the sophists who are also, fans of techne, so to speak. There are Heraclitus is famously critical of the Pythagoreans for being polymaths concerned with much learning and little sense from the standpoint of Heraclitus. So there's a little bit of an emphasis on techne before then, but it's really Aristotle that makes techne a critical thing for these questions. Sorry, Dan had a comment.
Yeah, one more thing on wonder. So it seems
Okay.
like you talk with people and so on, and it's being are, and it seems like such a trivial statement, and there is nothing there. And unless you are like struck by wonder, then you cannot understand Heidegger and his project. And it's like when he says that being are, and you follow Heidegger like a huge in between open, or he says beings as being. And being at beings, it's as beings, and you see that it's not just some trivial stuff, but it's something there that it's a huge space open, and that's what Heidegger's project is happening. And it's if you are not struck by wonder, there is no way you can see that, and it's following Heidegger to me. Like you need to be struck by this thing, that such a common and trivial thing that we don't even notice these days. It's
Sure, it's just a word to a lot of people. I entirely agree with you. This is one of those things where there is no substitute for having the experience yourself. You can't read about it, right? You have to enact it, right? It has to be authentic. It has to be yours. You have to do it. You have to reproduce the noetic seeing involved, so to speak, to be platonic about it for a second. But the other thing that is noteworthy here is this is very characteristically Heideggerian in that it is talking about how a disposition teaches something essential about truth, right? The dispositions are not something to be, shunted aside as irrational and not trustworthy and, not up to logical snuff standards, so we don't have to pay attention to it. No. The notion of grounding attunement or fundamental attunement in the first place is saying that there is messages and information about the nature and truth about being itself conveyed to Dasein in mood, in the traps and tricks of amazement, so to speak. So being held and mesmerized by something is telling you something. Pay attention, right? That's the kind of underlying message.
Yeah, the attunements, like in being in time and all over Heidegger, is that like this, that are so fundamental that basically whatever you say, it's coming afterwards, including reason and all the arguments you have, and it's kind of more an afterthought in this opening that an attunement it's kind of give you access to.
And this, to Heidegger's credit, is his own this is where he decisively moves beyond Husserl, right? He's not just doing phenomenology without the attunement business. He's not just doing phenomenology of the internal, concepts, you're using in, processing sense perception or something. Getting to the level of these other things and showing that these other things are part of Dasein structure and part of being in the world. That's definitely Heidegger's own contribution. There's later people, other fields, Coxide, et cetera, that try to make much of it. Can argue about how philosophically well they do, but the point that attunements, mood-like things are could not possibly be there without truths of being behind them. That's a Heideggerian insight, and he's extending it here to trying to put himself in the shoes of the Greeks saying physis and aletheia to explain what arising appearing of truth out of unconcealment feels like, not just looks like, but feels like. Yeah, fair point. Okay. That next time we're going to be, sorry, Tausif?
Yeah. So you repeated this statement that wonder is not care a couple of times,
Yes.
but for me, like I haven't read the text yet, but what you're suggesting is that wonder is like sort of is sustaining unconcealment, right? Or like and it also it is like a grounding disposition. So when there is like when wonder is sort of um, a is somehow attached to the truth, and it is some has like a sustaining characteristic. For me, it looks like it is intense care with more intensity, something of that sort. Are you understand what I'm saying?
I do, but I mean, to me, it's a definite specific inflection. You can say that care is a basic structure Dasein always has, but the in wonder, it's before the appearing of truth itself, before the appearing of things, still disorganized, still not categorized, still not comprehended, felt as unexplored territory, felt as independent of the Dasein, over against it, and filling one with awe, right? All of that as a disposition is different from anxiously being concerned with the burden of one's existence, anxiously being concerned with the one's neediness that you get in care, right? Care is part of this of the analysis of everyday Dasein, and everyday Dasein is usually not stuck in wonder. Even everyday Dasein, with his cares of the day, not being philosophic, not reflecting on being as such or existence as such, feels and has the structure of care, is always burdened with his cares, and so the structures of being in time are meant to be not necessarily more basic, but certainly more common. The experience of wonder he's describing here is not felt by everybody, certainly not every day. It's not even felt by philosophers all the time. It is a peak experience of philosophers and some scientists at times. Yes, everyone may participate it to a lesser degree, but it's not an everyday and always already every day, right? Wonder is not something everyone is always experiencing. It's an attunement to mystery and awesomeness of mystery, specifically as a felt, most of the time when Dasein deals with beings, he takes them as they are for their meaning in an equipmental contexture for what he can do with them, techne, which is where we're going. But to instead linger on the puzzling curiosity that they are at all is a rare occurrence. Now, there may be some aspect of that that's discussed in Being in Time when he talks about being brought up short by something which is out of order and it, suddenly becoming, just present to hand, right? And you stare at it and wonder, right? that can be a moment of wonder, but it's usually an unsettled one that is rapidly undone to return to the familiar. Wonder is a sustained unusualness of things, a sustained sense of the unusualness of things, of the unexplored territory of that Dasein is, in some sense, always in as the mystery. Josh, great question, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, another way of putting it is that we're not explicitly aware of that, of the uncanniness in everyday experience. But it's
Yes.
not that we don't experience it. If we didn't experience it, we wouldn't even experience the everyday. It's just that it's not it's hidden, it's concealed, but nevertheless, it's operative. It has to be operative always. So I tend to think of care in general as applying to that's the most fundamental structure of Dasein, and wonder would be a certain kind of dimension within care, and fundamental anxiety also. So everyday care would really be, I mean, the kind of anxiety that may or may not go along with it, and there may not be any anxiety that goes along with everyday care, but fundamental anxiety. And by the way, he also describes fundamental anxiety in terms that are very similar to wonder, in the sense that he talks about that as something that's only, an unusual, certain people sometimes have, are able to experience fully that
Sure.
quality of fundamental anxiety. So he sort of
Or people at times, yes.
People at times, right?
Yeah,
right.
I don't disagree with that in the sense that at the level of fundamental attunements, I do think that wonder is not an anxious condition. This is a personal gloss. It is there's too much of the a sense of the beauty and glory in that which is for which there is the awe in wonder, for it to be at bottom an anxious condition. It is possible to have an attitude towards being an unexplored territory that is a fundamentally anxious one. I put it to you that is not the experience of wonder. That is the experience of being in an uncontrolled, dangerous cosmos. As wonder is being in an unexplored, wondrously beautiful cosmos. That doesn't mean that there can't be positive and negative aspects of both dispositions, but there's something in the disposition of wonder which is transported outside of itself, and it is past caring about me. If you get me. Your hand's still up. I don't know if you still have more, but
no.
Okay,
I'll put it down.
Okay. Toward the very end, we get the turn from Physis to techne. Why? This is 153 is what I'm looking at, right? He's saying techne is a basic attitude towards Physis where the preservation unfolds and established. So he's saying there is a sense of techne. I think he's thinking primarily here of Aristotle, where it is a means of holding onto unconcealedness. So there's a positive valuation of techne in this sense here. This is not the modern technology of our next essay, although there will be elements in common in terms of modes of revealing. What is the way in which techne is a holding on to truth for, say, an Aristotle, or he says for the Greeks, but I think this is truer of the late Greeks than of the earlier ones. Was any of this stuff about techne comprehensible, incomprehensible to people? Do we even just get what the word techne means to the Greeks? Silence. Techne means, this is on 155, to grasp beings as emerging out of themselves in the way that they show themselves in their outward look, eidos or idea, in accordance with this, to care for beings themselves and let them grow. to order oneself within beings as a whole through productions and institutions. Okay. It is a proceeding against physis, but not to overpower or exploit it. So what you get in Aristotle is the claim that techne follows nature, art follows nature, and the works of nature are always exceedingly more fine than the works of techne, the works of art. This is not necessarily the attitude toward these things that one is going to get in later modern, especially modern philosophy, let alone in the question concerning technology next time. But the point here is that art, as experienced by the late Greeks, by the Aristotle, the Socratics were later, is a means of holding on to the revealed truths and things, because the relation things have and the way that we can interact with them is part of the truth that is unfolded for us. The point is that equipmental contexture doesn't start from a purely human construct. It starts from the provisions nature makes, and early experience of the arts in the Greeks is a following and imitating ways of physis that is, a thin supplement on top of them, not a replacement of them, if you get me. We are very far from the Descartes, conquering nature for the sake of the relief of man's estate. The notion of nature as something to be hostile to man that must be conquered really only comes in after, I would say, Christianity, the Gnostics, something like that. And it really doesn't get full footing until modern times, early modern times, I'm thinking. But one of the reasons this matters is what we're seeing here is a notion of techne as art in the Greeks that is very far from the later understanding of a conquering or challenging revealing of things that you might get in either modern philosophy or especially the technology stuff we'll get into in the essay next time. But it is still, even the latter, we'll learn, it is still a mode of revealing, right? There is still a way in which the awareness of, let's go to this way, the causal relationships between things is exposed by art in a way that holds fast to what nature has revealed. The classic statement of this is that the artisan must obey nature in order to manipulate it, right? That sense of techne as obedience to nature and what nature gives is what's really being underlined here. Is Dan?
Yeah, I have a question for you. So by the end of this book, Heidegger is going to talk about art and his notion of art, and of course there is the origin of the work of art. Do you think that he try to go back to this techne, or he's more like trying to oppose the modern technology with his notion of art, which is kind of in a way goes back to this techne? So it's a going back to this, or it's a more a modern version of techne that opposes the modern technology, his notion of art?
I think there's an element of it here, but I also think he's thinking of the opposition Nietzsche sets up between art and truth. I'm thinking of the first of the 4 books of the Nietzsche lectures. Art does multiple things for Heidegger, and one of them is to contrast with technology, but in Greek they're the same word. And so in the Greeks, they were a similar thing. Nietzsche makes art into something which he will place above truth in value, because truth has to do with what has to be, and art has to do with what we would wish to be. And he'll put justice above. Heidegger will put justice above those two for Nietzsche. In his Nietzsche lectures, he will claim that the hierarchy of value for Nietzsche is truth, art over it, and justice over that, where justice is like the requirements of the will to power or something like that. my point is that that intermediate role of art in Nietzsche is something that Heidegger is also always reacting to. He does not want art to become a value ideal that is seen as higher than being. He needs it to always be a revealing of what is already there, right? So I mean, we haven't done all of the works of Heidegger on art. I do think there's an element here of what he's saying about techne, which is closer to some of the things he says about art in other respects. I also think he thinks that this is not just true of Greek art, but is true of Greek techne generally. The one place he might differ from that is when we start getting into techne of argumentation and formalization of method and anything like that, and logic and so on. That might start getting into seeds of later technological thinking, if you get me, or representational thinking, or truth is correctness. The other thing I would connect all this to, though, is all of the understanding of equipmental contexture that you get in early Heidegger. Techne is being talked about here, and equipmental contexture are very close, right? There's even ways in which you can understand some of the things about techne here, and some of the stuff in what Plato has as doctrines about being. What do I think Heidegger is missing here? I do think Heidegger is missing something here, which is that the Greeks have a very strong sense of the distinction between anything humans do and what happens naturally, right? The nomos phusos distinction precedes the phusos techne distinction and overlays it. And that's a big part of why, to the Greeks, the techne is subordinate to phusos. Heidegger makes the case in other places that the understanding of being that you get in Plato, for example, is fundamentally coming from a productive comportment, he says. We talked about a little bit on the discussion of the Rosen book. I don't know that that's true. I think that it's fair to say that it is true by people later in the tradition, by the time of Alexandrian Platonism or something like that, if not Plato himself. But again, that's where we're getting into matters that might be contentious, as opposed to what he's saying about techne here is he's just trying to trying to say that art is a means of holding on to the mode of revealing for the Greeks, but that there is a danger in that of substituting the human usefulness and human methods for the role of revealing truth. Dan?
Yeah, one more question. In the paragraph that you just read there, 155, it says it's to grasp beings as emerging and then to, in their outlook, eidos idea. Is this going towards in framing, especially in the German roots? Are you aware of that? To grasp and to outward look?
I mean, the outward look is Plato an idea, and grasp is concept, begriff. So I think this is, at this point, just Plato. Is he going to claim that the productive comportment technical understanding of Plato is something that can fall off into the modern understanding of technology? He will claim that. I think that the decisive break is quite late. What do I mean by decisive break? The point at which the truth itself is viewed as a constructed, humanly made, conventional theory used by human beings for their own purposes. At that point, connection to truth as originally meant is severed. It is easy to see that has already happened in Nietzsche. It is easy to see that is what is being described in the essay we'll read next time, but we should read it for next time. I do not think it is happening yet here. All I see here is he's referring to the, put it this way, the machinery of Plato's understanding of the arts. Will he claim that one is going to provide a seed for the other? sure. There's a whole bunch of connecting tissue in between. Okay, I've gotten through everything I wanted to get through, but I want to give people a chance to give their reactions to the whole book, as opposed to just the section we just read just now. If you don't, I'm going to have some, because I always do. Did he make his case? The case that the essence of truth as correctness, as conventional understanding, lies upon a truth as openness, as aletheia, I think is sound. He already, went over that in the essay we read back in December, but that basic thing that the structure of the open is necessary for anything like correctness to arise. It's a sound piece of reasoning. I think he's also right that the Greeks already saw that, right? That's already there in some of the philosophical think of the Greeks. That makes it, that puts the thought itself on even stronger ground, right? It seems to be true. It's important to emphasize. It's not conventionally, he deserves plenty of credit for bringing that out, highlighting it, and stressing it. And he's plausibly found it already in the Greeks, right? And that strengthens the case for it, if you get me. Next, he wanted to show that this founding in the Greeks was not fully explored, that the question of the inquiry into aletheia itself was left as a road not taken because the Greeks wanted to focus on the what are beings, and he tried to explain that from their fundamental comportment of wonder. The fundamental comportment of wonder seems accurate. The interpretation of being as in its meaning for the Greeks, especially the later Greeks, not necessarily all the pre-Socratic, etc., but or even some of the sophists, but certainly the Socratics seem sound, right? So those are two strong marks for interpreting the Greeks charitably and seemingly correctly. Where I can still take issue with him is I think that he does not follow the Greeks in detail and where they went from that wonder with that understanding of being into their exploration of the open. And there was a reason that they turned away from truth as perception in doing so. And it has to do with the unreliability of perception without in the aesthetic sense as opposed to the noetic sense, without all the qualifications that Greek philosophy very elaborately put upon it. Truth has to be about the common, it has to be about the stable, it has to be more than the private possession of individual minds to count as truth, to reach to being. And I do not think that was an error in the Greeks. That's part of the uncovering of what gets to count as a being, so to speak. Okay. So could he have brought out those things better here? I don't know. He didn't have enough time, but maybe. I don't think he's entirely just to how much the Greeks did think about these things and why they didn't think about them quite the way he does. Okay. He is trying to leave open for himself the room to explore the structure of Dasein as that relation to that open, and especially to explore its event-like structure or its decided in-timedness, so to speak, as opposed to its search for what is lasting or reliable. Instead, the focusing on the actualized nature, the in-time nature, the embodied nature, if you like, of that of the happening of truth itself that Heidegger wants to emphasize. Okay, find that's what he, it's the focus of his philosophy. It's where his questions are. So one understands why he is going to differentiate those and stress those. And any time he sees, someone could have asked that question then, but they didn't, he'll wonder why weren't they me? And the answer is because they're not you, right? They follow their own perceptions. And to his credit, he does say they were following their own destiny in terms of the questions they asked. Okay. I'm trying to give you my basic overall assessment of the work. The other thing I would say is I think that Heidegger, with the example of wonder, has proved out his case, if it needed more proving, that fundamental attunements are a a basic source of truth about being or truth about truth. Things that would be considered metaphysical don't have to be approached with pure abstract reason and logic. They can be approached with properly, charitably appreciated attunement experiences, if you put it that way. Okay, that to me is the merit of the work. For myself, some of the presentation of the question of truth in the essay we read back in December, though much terser, much harder to follow in each nuance, is to me more powerful than this. Here, the description of wonder is new, important, valuable, different. But the description of the background of mystery, insistence, all of that stuff that we got in the later stages of the essay in December seem to me to go beyond this, and they go beyond it perhaps because he's just compressing more material he might have gone on to from here into a shorter essay. That may make it harder to understand. I don't think that December essay is the train wreck that Pete is worried that it is. I do agree that this is clearer because it's for students and it's spread out over multiple lectures, and he goes over his ground again and so on. I don't think it goes quite as far into the structures of things like insistence in the mystery or errancy. All right, that's my assessment of the book. Anyone else have comments on any of that or their own version of Josh?
I'll hold off if people want to have specific comments about the book as a whole. I didn't. I was gonna, chime in if nobody wanted to address that particular, the book as a whole.
It's your hand up, so feel free to go for it.
Okay. So I had a question for you. Since you were, it was the issue of wonder that maybe we were the most unsatisfied with in the book. I'm wondering if you think that Heidegger had shifted his position a little bit relative to, what was it, 1930, 1931, when he wrote What is Metaphysics? And there I'm looking at where he writes, first of all, he says, fundamental anxiety is being face to face with the nothing, and putting oneself before the nothing is anxiety. And then he says, only because the nothing is manifest in the ground of design can the total strangeness of beings overwhelm us. Only when the strangeness of beings oppresses us does it arouse and evoke wonder. Only on the ground of wonder, the revelation of the nothing, does the why loom before us. Only because the why is possible, such can we in a definite way inquire into grounds and ground them. Only because we can inquire and ground is the destiny of our existence placed in the hands of the researcher. So do you think that there's a consistency here over that period of 4 or 5 years? Was it 1935 when he did the current book?
I don't see a change in his own position on that. Not my claim. I liked his treatment of wonder here. The only thing I had issue with was the degree to which the Greeks launched from it into the search for the stable being amidst the appearance. So there is the why anything all rather than nothing, the appearing from the background of nothingness. There's also the finding of the stable in the flux, so to speak. And the latter is the typical Greek concern here. One can read in that an awareness of the nothing as the finitude of man. The Greeks, in their trying to find the stable and reliable, were reflecting on the mortal condition themselves, without question. That's why they were looking for something more lasting than opinion or the works of man, something like that. So there was that awareness there, but Heidegger here in this book did not thematize that. He did not take us from the Greek search for the stable and enduring in being to a basis of that in an anxiety about mortality, which he easily could have done. And he did not take us from the wonder as the stuck in the unusual, along with its positive note of past caring about me, towards the Greek search for the stable, if I can put it that way. But both of those are just, to me, things he could easily have connected if he wanted to. They're connectable without, deviating from any of the other things he's trying to say here. I think they paint the Greeks in a somewhat better light if you do connect them in terms of the depth and authenticity of their engagement with the issues that he's discussing. I don't think they would fundamentally change Heidegger's position, or this position here is, has evolved since the 1931 or something. I do think that the Greeks would have less of a note about the fundamental anxiety underneath it than Heidegger would have. I think that's a temperamental difference to a degree. And maybe one reflecting an enormous amount of intervening spiritual history, if you get me. But I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else want to give a Dan? Do you want to give a capsule or summary of your appreciation of the book or lack thereof? No, he's good. All right. In that case, I will remind everyone that our next time we decided is going to be on the 13th of April. And the reading is just going to be the question concerning technology. And I will see you all then. And thanks for coming. Oh, last thing, I'll put this video of all this up on YouTube later tonight. It usually takes anywhere from 3 to 4 hours to actually get up there because of all the codex things involved. But sometime later tonight, this should be up on YouTube. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.